Hello, and welcome to this, our 60th live stream. Early alphabetic inscriptions in funnel cakes. Now, this is sort of a tongue-in-cheek comment on the Gershon Galil's recent early alphabetic inscription that he claims to have deciphered from a block that was found in Jerusalem. Now, the issue is that when I look at that block, I don't see much. I just see chisel marks, and there can be an effect that happens sometimes called pareidolia, and pareidolia is essentially where you look up in the clouds and you see shapes like, a hand or a puppy or a fire engine. Those things are not really in the clouds, but you're seeing them. Your mind sort of interprets them as specific shapes. Well, there's been times, I used to go to Ren fairs. I used to really enjoy Ren fairs. I was a vendor at Ren fairs. And you'd get these things called funnel cakes. And I think they're basically a kind of deep fried cake where the batter is sort of threaded onto, well, a funnel, deep fried in oil, and then covered with usually a tart fruit sauce like raspberry, and then covered with like a mountain of whipped cream. They were delicious. But if you were to look at a funnel cake, you might be able to read an early alphabetic inscription in them. Just like some people see, you'll sometimes hear like something like the Virgin Mary being shown in a piece of French toast. The Virgin Mary is not really showing up on a piece of French toast, but people's brains are filling what they think they see in it. And the same thing happens to epigraphers sometimes, where they think they're seeing something and they really aren't. So that's really where the title, today's title, comes from: early alphabetic inscriptions in funnel cakes. Now, besides this, I also want to give a very special welcome to all our new subscribers. Last Tuesday, I think it was, I had a question and answer session with Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy on his channel, and it turned out really great. So if you want to check out his channel after the live stream, you can see it there. But as a result of that, this channel has picked up about 150 new subscribers. So I want to take this opportunity to welcome them to the channel, and I hope they really enjoy the content here. So for those who have not been longtime subscribers to this channel, basically the way these Friday Q&As work is I basically take your questions and I try to answer them as best as possible in roughly 3 minutes time. Okay? Now, the rules of these live streams generally go like this. If it's a super chat, they generally go to the front of the line. Now, I picked some non-super chats to begin the session just to make sure things are fairly weighted. But I do take non-super chats also. So if you ask a question in the live stream, it does have to follow a certain format. The question has to begin with a Q and a colon, so I know it's directed to me, because we get a lot of comments in the live stream, and I have to scan through it to see which questions are directed at me. And if I don't see that Q and the colon at the beginning of the question, I just go right past it. The second thing is only mention your question once. Okay, if it's a non-super chat and you want to ask it, don't repeat the question. We're getting we've really become sticklers on this rule, just because we had so many people abuse the situation. So if you want your question answered and we don't answer it this session, you're always free to answer it in a future live stream, but don't repeat it, because that will guarantee it doesn't get answered. And finally, and the final thing here applies to super chats and non-super chats, When you ask your question and it has to do with a verse in the Bible or a foreign word, we ask you to include the chapter and verse of the final, where I can find the passage, or in the case of a foreign language, what language it is and what you think it means, so that we have some frame of reference to go on. So without that context, it's kind of difficult to sort things out sometimes. So anyway, with that said, let's get in it, because we have got a very, very full program tonight. We have had something like 15 super chats already tonight. I mean, just an amazing number. So we're going to get right into this. So our first question, we're going to take 4 non-super chats to begin with. Our first question is from Mecha Tanky Stalinist. Okay. Well, I'm not sure about the efficacy of tanks anymore, but Mecha, that's the way of the future. And he or she asks, do you have an interpretation of 2 Kings 3:27? I've heard atheists and polytheists argue that Chemosh, the deity of Moab, overturned Yahweh's prophecy. Okay, let's talk about this, and let's talk about Yahweh's prophecy here, because it's not quite what it seems. We'll pull up the Bible here. Now, we'll actually just sort of skip through this passage. There's no reason for us to read it all, but we'll just sort of skip through it and get to the relevant bits here. Now, 2 Kings 3:1. We'll start with the king and Kings Involved. Now, Jehoram, son of Ahab, became king over Israel at Samaria in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 12 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, though not like his father and his mother, for he put away the sacred pillar of Baal, which his father and had made. Nevertheless, he clung to the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin. He did not depart from it. Okay, now this is an important clue here of what's going on. What did Jeroboam, son of Nebat, do? Okay, what he did was he essentially burned incense in the temple. What he did was he would play the role of priest. Now, in the theocratic kingdom of Israel, kings were not allowed to do priestly duty. It was forbidden, absolutely forbidden. And Jeroboam, well, he went into the temple and he burned incense, which was a definite no-no. So what we have here is Jehoram doing the same thing. He's doing evil by confusing those roles of king and priest. Okay, so that's sort of the context of all this. Now, verse 4. Now, Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep breeder and used to pay king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. Now, this is the same king Mesha of the Moabite stone. So we actually have 2 different perspectives on this same battle. This is the Israelite side, their perspective. But we also have the Moabite stone that gives us the king of Moab's perspective on this also. Okay, verse 6. Jeroboam musters all his men. Then he went and sent word to Jehoshaphat, saying, verse 7, the king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you go with me to fight against Moab? And he said, I will go up. I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your people, as your horses. So Jehoshaphat goes with him. So they go up. But verse 11. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not a prophet of the Lord here, that we may inquire of the Lord by him? And one of the king of Israel's servants said and answered, Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here, who used to pour water on the hands of Elijah. Verse 12. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. Okay? So we have this really interesting alliance going on here. This is the first mention of the king of Edom. So basically, you have the king of Israel, the king of Judah, and the king of Edom going after the king of Moab. Very interesting alliance here. Verse 13. Now Elisha said to the king of Israel, "What do I have to do with you? Go to the prophets of your father and to the prophets of your mother." Wait a minute. Who are the prophets of the mother of Jehoram? Well, those are the prophets of Baal. Elisha is essentially telling this guy to take a hike. That's not a great start here. Not a great start. And the king of Israel said to him, "No, for the Lord has called these three kings together to give them into the hand of Moab." In verse 14, and Elisha says, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, I would not look at you nor see you." Essentially, he's saying, wouldn't give you the time of day if it wasn't for the one of your three. This is a terrible start. So anyway, he basically says, okay, verse 15, "But now bring me a minstrel," and it came about when the minstrel played that the hand of the Lord came upon him. For he said, "Thus says the Lord, make this valley full of trenches." Okay, now, that's pits, essentially. "For thus says the Lord, you shall not see wind, nor shall you see rain, yet the valley shall be filled with water, so you shall drink, and both of you and your camel and beast. But this is but a slight thing in the sight of the Lord. He will also give the Moabites into your hand. Then you shall strike every fortified city," blah, blah, blah. Okay. And verse 20, "It happened in the morning at the time of the offering of sacrifice, the whole of the water came by way of Adam, and the country was filled with water." Okay. Now all the Moabites heard that the king came up and fight against them, and all who were able to put on armor and older were summoned and stood at the border. Okay. But when it came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites arose and struck the Moabites, verse 24. So they fled before him, and they went forward into the land, slaughtering Moabites. Okay, so far the prophecy is panning out. We should go back, actually, and say here, "You shall strike every fortified city and every choice city, and fell every good tree, and stop all the springs of water, and mar every good place with stones." Okay. Verse 25, "Thus they destroyed the cities. Each one threw a stone down every piece of land. So they stopped all the springs of water and felled all the good trees until Kir Haresh. Only they left the stones, however the slingers went about it and struck it." Verse 26, "When the king of Moab saw that the battle was too fierce for him, he took with him 700 of the men who drew swords to break through to the king of Edom, but they could not." So they couldn't get past the coalition. "Then he took his oldest son, who was about to reign, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. Then there came great wrath against Israel, and they departed from him and returned to their own land." Okay. So here's what we have here. What we have here is actually a kind of stalemate. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. They were given the Moabites were given into the hand of the Israelites to an extent. To an extent. It didn't overturn the prophecy, because the Israelites did actually, they clogged the wells, they tore down the cities, they struck down many Moabites. But this isn't exactly a promise here of absolute unmitigated success either. Right? And really, this was something that was promised not to, say, Israel, but to Judah. Okay? This prophecy is something that was given to Jehoshaphat. It's not given to the king of Israel, Jehoram, and it's not really given to the king of Edom either. So when it actually comes down to the battle, and battle takes place, the vengeance happens, but Israel presses on. So this is what's happening: is Israel is pressing on beyond his allies. Okay, so you got the battle, and the coalition of the three are continuing on against Moab, but you have sort of in the vanguard Israel, and Moab tries to strike at the king of Edom, can't reach him. Israel's in the way. Israel is in the way, and Judah's in the vanguard. They're in the rear. They're in the rear flank. Once the king of Moab sacrifices his son, then the tables turn. Tables turn on Israel, and some vengeance takes place for the sins that Israel commits. So it's not a, and really from when we look at, say, the Israelites, the Moabite stela, we don't get the sense from that stela that Mesha defeated three kings: Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Edom. That stone really focuses on their victory over the king of Israel, Jehoram and his sons. So, Mesha's view of this is really a snapshot of the bigger. Mesha is focusing on the one part of this attack where they won, but it's not a complete victory for either side. You could probably say it's a 80% victory for the coalition, a 20% victory for Moab. So it's more of a balance here. Moab takes incredibly large losses. They lose cities, they lose wells, they lose people, they lose livestock. They lose a lot of people in this. But they're going to cut out, claim a small victory over the king of Israel when he routs them. But the other two armies, they're not touched. They're not touched by this. What they probably do is then, once they see what happens to Jehoram's army, they probably just withdraw. That's probably the end of the matter right there. So anyway, I want to thank you for that question. It's a good question. But prophecy is it's not a deterministic thing, and it's not always an absolute thing. There can be shades of fulfillment as well. And we have to keep that in mind as we look at some of these passages. Unfortunately, we in the West often see prophecy as fatalism, and we really shouldn't. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Very much appreciated. It's a great question. Hopefully not too long of an explanation, though. All right, our second question is from the MRB. Good to see you here tonight. He says, people often say that Adamah, red or brown, means youthful, but the Song of Solomon 5:10 says, some say, my beloved is beautiful white and he is youthful. Is this accurate? Why not brown? Okay. Bible again. I'm going to go to the Song of Solomon, verse 5. Fortunately, this time we only have to read one verse. Okay. And it says, my beloved is dazzling and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. Okay. Now, here, Adom can mean Adam, as in a man. It can mean red. And here's the context. Basically, the idea here is that he's healthy, vigorous, masculine. We see this, for example, in, like, say, Egyptian literature. Where men of health, men's men, okay, are seen as being, just a, physically fit, physically vigorous, always trying to, outdo themselves athletically. And that's sort of the impression of Ruddy here. Now, what is being translated here as dazzling, sa'ak. Now, this comes from a verb called natsak. And natsak, according to Halat, means splendorous, glory, duration, even success. It doesn't have the connotation of white. Okay? So I don't think this is accurate. As far as the why not brown, Adam, can be a reddish brown. I mean, it's supposed to like represent red ochre. So it is a reddish brown. Okay? But the first part, the natsak, that's just splendorous, glorious. And that's all it's meant to convey here. So anyway, thank you for the question. Fortunately, a very simple question. Very much appreciated. Okay, next question here is from Warrior of the Most High. Did Ramses II exalt himself to be one of the Necharu? If so, does it add up more drama to the Exodus account? Only in the movies. It is true that Ramses II did exalt himself as one of the Necharu. We do see this transition during the reign of Amenhotep III, where Egyptian kings stopped seeing themselves as gods in potential and moved to being gods when they're coronated. And this continues right up till the end of, say, Dynasty 20. After the beginning of the Third Intermediate Period, we no longer see the kings of Egypt being referred to as gods in their lifetime. And part of that is because of the failure of the monarchy at that point to maintain its control. So we really have to be very careful here to just say, okay, look at this and say, yes, during this period, Ramses II, yes, he did consider himself to be a god. During the Opet festival, he would take the bark, his sacred bark, and he'd follow after as one of the Necharu. So yeah, absolutely, he did. But does this add more to the drama? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it certainly is sort of hammers home the idea of all the gods of Egypt being judged, and a god here being not just, say, something that's worshipped in a temple, but basically anybody who has the power over life and death. And this is the problem with a term like Necharu, or even Elohim in the Hebrew, is it's not always talking about gods in essence or ontology, but gods in function. Okay. So, the fact that an angel is not a god in ontology doesn't mean it can't mess up your day if it really gets torqued at you. Okay? They're beings of immense power. Likewise, a king, or a judge, yeah, they might not be God in essence, but boy, they've got enough power to make a mess of your day if you get them angry. So I don't think it adds more drama to the Exodus account, but it's certainly not inconsistent with it either. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very much appreciate it. Okay, and the fourth question, non-super chat of the night, is from Carlo. And he asks, You mentioned American young Earth creationism. Yep, quite a bit. Yep, and the reason I do is because the expression of young Earth creationism that we find mostly in North America comes from, essentially, it derives from a set of beliefs that we find in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay, so much of that comes from Seventh-day Adventism. Whereas, say, I should continue the question, sorry. Are there other non-American variants of young Earth creationism? Yes, there are. What's the deal with those? The deal with those is that they tend to come from a different line of thinking. That you could probably call them more anti-Darwinists than, say, young Earth creationists explicitly. One of the things that makes American young Earth creationism distinct is they are reading the chronologies of... They're using the chronologies, or I should say the genealogies, of Genesis 5 and 11 as if they are literal. And is as if they are meant to be used as chronological data. This is how they get, say, a date of the flood that's that dates to 2350 BC. The problems with this are multiple. I mean, there's many problems with this, and you know, maybe we'll get into this at some point. However, say a continental young Earth creationist won't necessarily use Genesis 5 and 11 in that way. Part of the reason why is because, say, in North America, at the same time the Seventh-day Adventists were developing these views, you had guys like Schofield's Study Bible become incredibly influential. Schofield's Study Bible was very influential, and it used Ussher's chronology. And that confirmed many of, say, the points of view that are, say, emphasized by American young Earth creationism. So, in, say in Europe, on the other hand, you did have several groups who were anti-Darwinist, but they're not necessarily using... they were never in the same way enamored with Schofield's Study Bible, nor were they, say, enamored with that sort of hermeneutic that would take Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 and try to date the age of the earth and the date of the flood with this. Okay? So, in some ways, they've sort of fared better, even though they haven't been as successful as American young Earth creationism. Now, American young Earth creationism is still a very vigorous movement. Some of that is because of the popularity of American fundamentalism, whereas, say, in Europe, you have much more, there was never really a fundamentalist movement in Europe. And the fact is that, Christianity in Europe tends to be very liberal anyway. So, those few people who are young Earth creationists in, say, Europe, the continent as they call it, tend to be allow a lot more alternate interpretations of, say, passages in Genesis than, say, more literalistic readings that you find in American young Earth creationism. So, say for them, like, for example, you'll still find American young Earth creationists today that say that the world is 6,000 years old, or that the flood took place in 2350. In Europe, a young Earth creationist might say, oh, the Earth is 100,000 years old. That's still technically a young Earth creationist. It's just a lot less young than, say, Darwinian evolution, or that sort of geology that came out of it, where the Earth is, say, 4 billion years old. So that's sort of the differences between the two. There are differences in denomination. Continental young Earth creationists tend to be more mainline Protestants. Occasionally, you'll find Roman Catholics who are. American young Earth creationists tend to be, say, more fundamentalists. So, there's differences in tradition, where they came from. Say, Seventh-day Adventist versus anti-Darwinist societies. You also find that just difference in hermeneutic as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. I appreciate that question. I try not to take a side on this, but that's the answer to the question. Thank you very much. Okay, now let's get to the super chats because we got a lot of them tonight. Our first super chat comes from MJMJ for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Does Jesus have a physical body in heaven now? Yes, he does. The fact is that the incarnation is still the incarnation. When the whole point of the Christian faith is that Christ defeats sin and death. And for Christ to defeat sin and death, he has to defeat the death of his own body. As the incarnation, he's fully God and fully man. And he's still fully God and fully man. And the resurrection is the resurrection of the body. So when Christ is resurrected from the dead and travels shows his proof of his resurrection to his disciples for 40 days, he then ascends to his heaven. And in heaven, he still retains his body. So absolutely, he is still an incarnated, he's God, second person of the Trinity, but he is also the incarnated Messiah. So yes, he still has a body. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. No, that's not. That's before. Okay. Our next super chat is from Cliff Wilson for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you think of Dr. Daniel Jackson's theory that pyramids are landing pads for aliens? Have you ever found a Goa'uld in a canopic jar? Please answer Chow Yi's question regarding sci-fi. Okay. Wow. Well, for those who are not familiar with Stargate, Dr. Daniel Jackson is the archaeologist who plays who goes with the military team through the Stargate to the planet of the Goa'uld. I don't have a great respect for Jackson's mastery of Egyptian, but well, I mean, when he was retranslating his colleague's inscription, I saw a few mistakes there. Right at the very beginning. Okay, so I would be one of those people that would have laughed him out at his paper there. I would probably have taken a different approach, though. At an academic paper like that, I would have probably have told him, "You're so dumb, you haven't read the literature." Not that I've ever done that before. I've had to tell a few colleagues that they haven't read 100 years of literature behind the paper they just gave. Yeah, it was not pretty. Now the second question. Have I ever found a ghoul in a canopic jar? No. But unfortunately, I've never found a canopic jar. I would love to find a canopic jar someday. Mummies I don't care for. I really don't want to find a mummy. I have found human bones at an archaeological site. Okay, I have found human bones. I actually found a piece of the top piece of a femur once, and where the femur where it inserts into the hip joint. Now, on human remains, the femur is really distinct. It's unmistakable when you see that ball joint. So, it was absolutely clear that this was a human femur. So, I have found a human femur on site. But no, I've never found a canopic jar. Really wish I could. That would just be so cool. So cool. I'd love that one. Let's get to Chow Yi's question here, because it's actually a pretty cool question. Chow Yi asks, how would you suggest writing good archaeological sci-fi without promoting quackery? Okay. Well, the first thing I would recommend is reading the book on writing Christian fiction. I don't remember the author. I read this when I was in college because I was doing a lot of fiction writing myself at the time. It was a very good book. One of the things that they said in the book was you really want to express a Christian worldview. You don't have to make it preachy. In fact, you shouldn't make it preachy. What you're trying to do in, say, Christian fiction, whether science fiction or any other kind of fiction, Christian fiction, is try to present the reality of the Christian worldview. Now, in the case of sci-fi, you are asking what-if questions. What if you went to a alien world and you were an archaeologist and you find some remains there? What would it look like? What would be the reality behind that in the Christian worldview? One of the masters of this was C.S. Lewis, who would write science fiction, with that eye towards expressing a Christian worldview through it. And he did books like Perelandra, Out of the Silent Planet. But these were books that were trying to show Christian concepts and the Christian worldview using those what-if questions of science fiction. What if you land on an alien planet and there's an unspoiled society where you see people like us, but aren't like us, who don't know sin yet? What does that look like? How does that relate? What happens when they do fall? So it's really, it's a challenge to do this without promoting quackery, because quackery is the easy way out. It's the simple way out. It's sensational. It'll sell you lots of books. But if what you're trying to do when you write science fiction is to entertain and educate at the same time, at least through, like, for example, I often say entertainment catechizes. It catechizes. Entertainment does more than just entertain. It imparts morality, ethics, culture, worldview. If you're trying to give someone a different worldview and different ethics, you can't be lazy about this. And the way you do this is you show the reality. You show reality as it would exist, even in a hypothetical situation, like going to another planet and finding the remains of an alien civilization. Who's to say that these remains were necessarily from, say, ancient aliens? What if they were from fallen spiritual beings? There's a lot of possibilities here. What if it's an extinct species? One that doesn't live anymore? One who decided to go their own way against God. Yeah, what if they didn't get a flood? What if they had fallen? And continue to do what they did, but didn't get a flood. There's a lot of questions you can ask here that make it consistent within a Christian worldview without it going into quackery. It just takes creativity. It takes a little creativity and basically adherence to God's word, at least under the cover. Again, you don't preach this stuff explicitly, but it seeps through every sort of sentence and paragraph and theme in your book. You know, one of the things I like to say is that, hey, you cannot understand the Lord of the Rings unless you understand that the ring is sin. This is where we're sort of, say, Peter Jackson, when he did his film adaptations of the Lord of the Rings, went off the rails. He couldn't understand the character's reaction to the One Ring. Some said, hey, I wouldn't touch that thing because I'd fall immediately. Others said, I wouldn't touch that thing because it has no attraction to me. He couldn't understand how something like the ring couldn't be universally attractive. But that's because Peter Jackson was interpreting the One Ring as evil, not as sin, temptation and sin. And that's the worldview, that Christian worldview was underneath Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And expresses that reality. And that's how it avoids quackery. It presents a fantasy worldview within that sort of Christian ethos. So anyway, great question. Thank you very much for the question. And I also want to thank Cliff Wilson for sponsoring that question. Thank you very much. Okay, oops. Next super chat comes from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. Oh, hello. What's your opinion of Michael Heiser thinking Genesis 1:1 should read when the beginning instead of in the beginning? Okay. I'm not hugely fond of it. I do like a formal equivalence translations. Okay. Now, I understand here what he's doing. He's doing a dynamic equivalence translation. That just means he's trying to do it thought for thought instead of word for word. But I also think in this particular case, a word for word translation, you could go either way. You can. That there is an ambiguity in the passage that with the in the beginning, and it is Bereshit, literally in the beginning. He's doing this translation to try to remove some of the ambiguity. And the ambiguity here is Genesis 1:1 a title, or is it an event? And I understand what he's trying to do here. I understand that he's trying to remove that ambiguity and turn it back into a title instead of an event. And I can see sort of the attraction of that. But I also think too that ambiguity exists for a reason. And that ambiguity goes, say, even beyond just the title versus event sort of situation. Because the ambiguity is between in and the beginning itself as well. That whole sort of when the beginning. I'm just gonna for point of illustration here, I'm just gonna go to Genesis 1:1. Bring that up here. Okay. Because here's the thing, while he removes the ambiguity of that introductory phrase, when the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, turns that whole verse sort of into a subordinate clause. It's not clear then where the subordinate clause ends. Whereas in the beginning, it's very clear that the prepositional phrase, and this is really a set prepositional phrase, it's not an adverbial clause. And I think that is a very, very important distinction. It turns Genesis 1:1 from a complete sentence with fronted by a prepositional phrase into an adverbial clause that makes it part of verse 2. And I don't like that. I don't think that's a good way to go. Because we do have a consecutive vav at the beginning of verse 2 that basically shows, when you get that in verse 2 it says, and the earth was formless and void. It starts with a consecutive vav. Now, a consecutive vav is a very, very special kind of conjunction. It sort of has the implication of after this. Now, we almost never translate it as that, but we could. It's very, very often you could translate it as after this very easily, because that's what it means. So when you have a verse like this, you go, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. After this, the earth was formless and void. Okay? So, when you got something, I'm just going to Hebrew just for my own reference, just for a second here. I'm sorry, that is not a consecutive vav. I take that back. So I did want to make sure I got that right there. So it's not a consecutive vav. But because it is an ordinary conjunction, that adds another level of complexity to this. So let's get back to the here. The consecutive vav comes at verse 3. Apologize for that. That was a mistake, and we will correct that right now. So, but it does take the problem I still have with Heiser here is that, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was formless and void, and I think it's giving you here preamble. And the Spirit moved over the face of the deep. I'm going to go back to the Hebrew here. What's that second? And the Spirit. And that's also a normal conjunctive vav. Okay, so we got this preamble. Now, when you do start to make that as a when in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and the darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit was moving over the face of the body. That's your whole subordinate clause. Then you got your consecutive vav in verse 3. After that, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay. So there's some implications. There are some, say, exegetical implications here by changing that first preposition. Okay. And in is a preposition here. It's a preposition to when. It turns it again. Your short prepositional phrase here is no longer a prepositional phrase anymore, but the beginning of a subordinate clause. And a very, very long subordinate clause. I think there's some problems here. So while I appreciate that he wants to reduce the ambiguity, I don't care for this much. I prefer the older reading on this. It's a formally. I prefer the formal equivalence here. I don't think the dynamic equivalence, his dynamic equivalence translation here is necessarily correct. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, next super chat is from Brick Creation for $20. Thank you very much for that very generous super chat. Is Mordecai in Esther 2:5-6 the same as Mordecai in Nehemiah 7 and Ezra 2:2, or another person that was carried to Babylon? What does the Hebrew grammar reveal about Esther 2:5-6? Is it saying that he or his fathers went into exile? Okay. I just want to put something here. All right, let's pull up First of all, let's pull up Nehemiah 7:7 and Ezra 2:2. Bible up here. And we actually can only need to do like Ezra 2:2 because it's essentially the same as Nehemiah's. So Ezra 2:2. Okay, I'll start verse 1. These are the people of the province who came up out of captivity of the exiles whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away to Babylon and returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his city. These came with Zerubbabel. All right, and Zerubbabel is the king, essentially, or the governor. Check him. Yeah, begotten. Yeah, he's the leader of the returning exiles. Okay, Zerubbabel is the leader. Yeshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Reliah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rehum, Banah, the number of the men of the people of Israel. Okay. Now, when we talk about Mordecai in Esther, and this Mordecai, we have to be cognizant of a few, say, historical facts. The Book of Esther takes place during the reign of Artaxerxes I, and he reigns from 465 to 424 BC. His great feast in the Book of Esther takes place in his third year, so 467 BC. Esther becomes a queen in 459 BC, and the death of Haman, the big event of the Book of Esther, takes place in 454 BC. Okay, so we do have a pretty good timeline for the events in the Book of Esther. Now, Ezra is here documenting the first migration of Israelites from Babylon back, which was now the Persian Empire, back to Israel. Okay? This takes place in 468 BC. So it happens before the events in the Book of Esther. Likewise, Nehemiah is more or less just copying this passage here, and he's part of the. In fact, Nehemiah is even listed as part of this first migration in verse 2. But he actually goes back to Babylon to bring another group of people back with him, and that event takes place about 20 years later. So, with that said here, I don't think that the Mordecai that we see in the Book of Esther is the same as the Mordecai in Ezra 2:2 and Nehemiah 7:7. And really because Nehemiah 7:7 is really just a copy of what we find in Ezra 2:2. So, the follow-up question here is, what does the Hebrew grammar reveal in Esther 2:5-6, where it says he or his fathers went into exile? Okay, let's look at that. So, Esther 2. Five to 6. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the capital, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. So they're giving you here an abbreviated. It's an abbreviated Toledot. Okay. So it's telling you sort of a bit of Mordecai's ancestry here. 6. Who had been taken into exile with captives who had been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Israel, had exiled. All right. Now, we are not exactly sure if Mordecai. Mordecai's old, but he's probably not so old at this point. We do have to remember that that over 100 years at this point have passed since the original deportation of the Judahites to Babylon. For the exile of Babylon takes place at, I believe, 586. So 585, 586, I believe. Just double check this just to be sure. Because right now I'm having a bit of memory issues. I just want to make sure I'm putting that right. Yeah, 586, 587. So let's just say 587 just, or 586 just for grins. Okay. So you got 586 minus 454. So it's 132 years. It's 132 years after the Babylonian exile. This is not, Mordecai was not alive when, Mordecai of Esther was not alive when the Babylonian exile took place. So he is probably the son of Jair, and Jair is probably the person who was actually exiled. So, but he's a son of probably one of the exiled. So, he falls into that camp. And we are not sure exactly what the who here is referring to. But it's common sense here to suggest that the who, which that Asher refers to probably Jair, or even maybe Shimei, but probably Jair. So it was probably one of his fathers that went into exile, because again, 130 years pass between the exile and the Haman incident. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Was there something? Oh, did I miss one? Okay, let's make sure we get that. Okay. Okay, we will definitely make good on that. So sorry about that. You make mistakes at times. I make lots of them. And we'll deal with that right after this. And sure that is. Need to paste this. Again, sorry about that. We will make good. Oh. Okie dokie. Okay. All right. So, oh, it looks like I just blotted out the other one. Okay. So, anyway. Okay. So anyway, to get to the point, it's not the same. It's not the same Mordecai in all likelihood. But and it doesn't look even like Mordecai was one of the original exiles, and it doesn't necessarily look like that the Mordecai of Esther went back to Israel, but stayed in the city of Susa, where Artaxerxes was. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Now let's get to the one we just missed here. Is this one here by Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Again, I apologize that we missed it, but we're going to make good with it. Okay, and he says, why in Jonah 3:3 the exact meaning of 3 days journey is unknown according to some Bibles. Example, the KJV. What do you think it could mean? All right. Well, let's pull up Jonah and let's take a look at it. Jonah 3. Okay. Pull up the Bible again. All right, and we'll take it from verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and proclaim to it the proclamation which I am going to tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3 days' walk. Okay. Essentially what these kind of tell you is it's a big city. It's a big city. Now, a day's walk varies according to historical counts. It's a unit of measure. It's a unit of measure. The idea is that you can walk 12 to 18 miles a day, essentially. Now, this is going to depend upon historical accounts, but it seems that when they talk about a day's walk in the ancient world, they tend to talk about it as 12 miles roughly. Practically speaking, 18. For some reason, the ancients also included times for camping and, feeding yourself and all that stuff. But 18 miles, 12 to 18 miles was typical, a day's walk. So what the writer is trying to tell you is that 3 days walk is roughly 36 miles. It's a city that's about 36 to say 48 miles across. Okay, and it's to tell you how great this city is. So I don't know why the King James Version. Let's see what the King James Version actually says, since you've quoted here. KJV of 3 days journey. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why this should be unknown, at least today. But yeah, it's essentially trying to tell you it's about 36 to 48 miles across. Because in verse 4, it's telling you, then Jonah began to go through the city 1 day's walk. So he enters into the city into, say 12 to 18 miles in. And then he starts to preach. And he cries out to said, yet 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Okay. So, he's basically, he's not going right, probably, he's, the capital, the palace is probably in the center. So basically a day and a half in. Essentially that 18-mile mark to, say, 24-mile mark into the city is probably the city center, where, say, the palaces are and the temples are and that sort of thing. So he's walking in. He's starting out here in sort of the in sort of the inner suburbs of the city, and he's proclaiming his message. This is where you'd often find, say, marketplaces. Okay, people might live on the outskirts, but the markets are kind of in the way that cities are often arranged in the ancient world. Your markets are sort of between the residential districts and, say, the temple districts. So it's a kind of an interesting little area for for Jonah to do his preaching. He's doing it in the marketplace. And this would create a fuss because this is a lot of different people from a lot of different socio-economic backgrounds would be here seeing the commotion. So, it's a very interesting little scene here. I think that's what's going on here. Is the exact meaning is it's a big city, 18, as I said, 36 to 48 miles, and he's walking into it that 18 to 24 miles to where, say, the marketplace would be. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Again, I deeply apologize for missing it. We are really grateful for the super chat. Thank you so much for the super chat. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate the question too. It's a very interesting question. Very, very interesting question, and it would have been a real shame to miss it. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. We really appreciate that. Okay. Another one from Brick Creation. Does the earliest manuscript of Revelation 25 entirely omits the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended? If so, how could this affect the meaning of the millennium, thousands of years? I don't think it would. Let's just pull this up, though, so we make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So I'm going to pull up Revelation. Revelation 20. And it is verse 5 here. And the rest of the dead did not come to life until 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Well, let's see. Does that actually... Well, I mean, if you take verse 4, and it says, And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given to them, and I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of the testimony of Jesus Christ, because the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, had not received the mark upon his forehead and hand, and they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Omit that clause. This is the first resurrection. Well, let's just say that's an addition. Let's say that extra, that phrase is a scribal gloss. Some scribe is going along and basically says, the rest of the dead didn't come. Well, we got here the dead in Christ reigning with Christ for 1,000 years. And that's the first resurrection. Verse 6, Blessed and holy is those who take part in the first resurrection, over which the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. And then it comes to the judgment. Okay. So, okay. Verse 13, and the sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead. And remember, the only people who are in Hades at this point are those who are judged, are the reprobate. Because according to Christ, he descends to Hades to set them free. The dead in Christ are now in heaven. So they're going. Sea gave up the dead, death and Hades gave up the dead. Again, the reprobate are the dead, gave up the dead which were within him, and they were judged, everyone according to their deeds. Remember, the first resurrection are those who are raised in newness of Christ. We're not judged by our deeds. We're judged by the finished work of Jesus Christ. So, we have to be very careful here that, okay, that second death is what's being sowed here. So even if this is a scribal gloss, it doesn't really change the meaning at all. So I don't think it means. I don't think it really affects the meaning, because other verses in the passage, talk about reigning with Christ for 1,000 years, and after 1,000 years, the dead are released, etc. So we have the word. I mean, here's one of the things when we're dealing with a passage like um, Revelation 20. Now, you can doubt whether or not this is a literal 1,000 years. Is this the Greek equivalent of 40 or 480 to the Hebrews, to Hebrew speakers? It's possible. 1,000 was used in that way, even within the biblical passages. However, that extended long period of time that it is trying to express, I think, is still there in the text. Because one of the things we see here is that the term 1,000 is repeated many times in chapter 20. Like verse 2, and he laid hold of the dragon and the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. Then verse 4, and they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Oh, we forgot verse 3 here. And threw him in the abyss and shut it up and sealed it over him, so that he should not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. We'll skip verse 5 because that's the question. Verse 6. But they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. Verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from prison. And it just goes on. It's just okay. How many times do you have to get the message that do they have to repeat 1,000 years to say at least that it's going to be a really long time? So I don't think the oldest manuscript not having that particular phrase is going to mean a whole lot overall. So thank you very much for that super chat. It's a very generous super chat, very much appreciated, and it's a good question, but I don't think it really changes anything. So thank you very much. Okay. Opera Creation again for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. In Revelation 11, 8-9, the Greek for body, toma, is singular. This could mean that two witnesses could be two law and prophet in one. I know a preterist view that sees Jesus, son of Ananias, as a candidate in Josephus' War 653. I really don't like the idea of mixing Josephus and scripture a whole lot. Using Josephus as an interpretive framework, I've had some problems with this, where there's some other people who've tried to use Josephus to interpret things, and I think that's deeply, deeply problematic. But let's take your passage here and let's read it and let's see what we get out of it. And it says here in verse 8, Revelation 11, verse 8, and they're dead, the word is Toma, will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified, and those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at and this is the tomata, for 3.5 days, and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid tomb. Read just to make sure you get everything right here. Okay, the first one is toma, and the second one is tomata, which is I believe, yeah, plural. It's the plural neuter. Okay. Now, you look this up in Bagda, which is probably the best lexicon we have, current lexicon. It's sort of the standard lexicon that everyone uses here, for doing Greek. And you look at Toma, and it's not just a body. This is really important here. It's not talking about, these are not bodies. These are corpses. Okay? It's not a body. It's a Baghdad defines this as either the body um of a dead human or animal. Okay, so this is not just saying that these are just sort of bodies lying around. These are corpses. So if this was talking about a body, as in just a just say this meat sack that we essentially walk around inside of, we would be it would probably be using the word soma, okay? But this is not soma or sarx, flesh. There's ways of expressing this meat sack that that we live in. But this is toma. This is a corpse, a dead body. So the two trying to allegorize this, the two witnesses to be a law and the prophet. I'm never comfortable with allegorical readings. I'm never comfortable with this. I've seen too much mischief happen because of allegorical meanings. So I'm not at all comfortable with that interpretation. I don't, and frankly, I don't see any reason why it just couldn't be, say, two prophets. Two prophets that, end up, getting killed. I don't see a compelling reason given given the context here. Yeah, it says, I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and the word here is martyrs. They're martyrs. And this is in Revelation 11:3. So these are the bodies of two martyrs. The law is not a martyr. The prophet is not a prophet is not a martyr. In it's just being as virtue of, say, a qualitative thing. These are people, not just symbols. Now, if you want to read an allegorical meaning underneath that, yeah, have at it. But I don't think it's the correct. I don't think it's the primary, and I don't think it's even the hidden meaning. It's a allegorical meaning, and that's sort of, you're at that point. You're sort of at in left field at that point. So again, another reason reason 51, I don't care for preterism all that much. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it, but I think there's compelling reason here to think that this is, just from the language, that this is a corpse. Toma's a corpse, and they're corpses that belong to martyrs. Which is what happens to martyrs. Martyrs get killed, and they leave bodies behind. Yeah. Ugly, but there it is. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I should have added just a little more here. He did say in the original Greek manuscript, it uses toma, then tomato for body, which we did go over. So at least we covered the whole question. And thank you very much for that generous super chat. Very much appreciated. I hope that answer sufficed. Very much appreciated. It's a good question. But I don't think that the weight of the text here is going to support it. But thank you very much. Now we've got one from the Camel Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shalom, shalom, Dr. Falk. Well, Shabbat shalom to you too. Question from a friend. Ooh. He's having a hard time understanding the Bible's stance on divorce. If divorce is wrong, what can someone in an abusive relationship do? Here's what she does. She gets out. Okay? Now, let's be careful about what we mean by abusive here, because even abusive here has been abused. If they're being physically abused, get out. If their life is in danger, get out. This is a non-negotiable. This is non-negotiable. Get the heck out. Um, the if verbal abuse, marginal, but I've heard some people say, some women say, "Oh, I feel just abandoned." That's abuse. That's not sufficient cause. That's not sufficient cause. If your life is in danger, though, if you or your children are going to experience bodily harm, get the hell out if they can. Now, fortunately, we do live in an age where there are women's shelters, and we got to understand too. This goes the other way too. You know, statistics tell us that 50% of men experience partner abuse. They just don't report it. They just don't report it. You know, and the fact is that very few women get convicted of abusing a domestic partner. Courts are more likely to say, "Oh, man's got a knife sticking out of his chest. Oh, it's his fault." Okay, so we don't live in exactly a balanced society here when it comes to dealing with domestic abuse. Now, as far as the Bible says that God hates divorce. He hates divorce. It was never meant to be. But divorce was given because of the hardness of people's hearts. Now, a spouse that is and there was a reformer that very much went into detail on this. His name was Martin Bucer. And I would recommend reading his book, which was Cellar House is the name of the author. He wrote a rather long book on Martin Bucer, where he goes into Martin Bucer's view of marriage and divorce. So I would recommend that as reading material on this. With that said, the whole idea of divorce is it was something that was permitted because the hardness of men's hearts. It's never the ideal. It's never the ideal. Sometimes it's necessary. Now, in the case of domestic violence, the person initiating this divorce is not actually the victim of the violence. It's the perpetrator. He's the one actually initiating it by being abusive. Okay? So, I want to be very, very careful here in that I'm not condoning divorce. I don't think it's an ideal. I think if it's possible to rectify a failing marriage, it should always be pursued. I think that there are some times when divorce is initiated that where it's unwarranted, because they're not meeting emotional needs. And the Bible never says that your marriage will be emotionally fulfilling. It'll never say that. It's a lot better. I mean, it's a lot better when marriage is emotionally fulfilling, but the Bible doesn't guarantee this. But there's also, you're the integrity and safety of your person and your children do come before the marriage. They do come. I mean, it's a matter of self-defense at that point. So, if it's physical abuse, get the heck out. And there's lots of resources available that are there to assist. There are abuse hotlines. There are women's shelters. And you did imply that it is a woman here. So at least for her, there's a lot of resources that are available today that weren't available even, say, 50 years ago. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for that super chat. I very much appreciate it. It's a very serious question, and yeah, it's one of those things that there's just no good good answer to this in as far as, there's not necessarily going to be a happy ever after ending here. But her safety comes first, essentially. But thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Our next super chat again comes from the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Do you think Behemoth is related to the Bull of Heaven from Mesopotamian myth? It's possible. But is it likely? Now, unlike Leviathan, we don't actually have a lot of ancient Near Eastern parallels for Behemoth. Now, we know Behemoth is the Hebrew word for beast. Beast of the field, sometimes cattle. So it's possible that there could be a connection here between the Bull of Heaven and Behemoth. Behemoth also has basically that whole idea of Behemoth as being sort of the great beast. There is like, for example, you look this up in, say, Halot. They will essentially equate it to the hippopotamus. Now, at first blush, that kind of seems a bit ridiculous. But there was a time when Israel had hippopotami. Hippopotamuses? I guess it's hippopotamuses. Okay. But they had hippopotamuses used to be in Israel. Because we have to remember, during, say, most of Israel's history, there was a swamp that divided the coastal plain from the Judean foothills. And hippopotamus used to live in that swamp. So Israelites did have some contact with hippopotamus. In fact, the Megiddo ivories, the ivories that we find at the Canaanite fortress at Megiddo, they're made of hippopotamus ivory. Essentially, the dentin of the teeth, the tusks of hippopotamus. So we do know that Israel had hippopotamus. And there are many scholars out there that do think that Behemoth is or was hippopotamus. Okay? And they are very, very scary animals. I mean, whoa. No, you don't need a T-Rex around when you got a hippopotamus. They are the most dangerous animal in Africa. Hippopotamus, after the mosquito. Okay, the mosquito is the single most dangerous animal in practically the world. Okay, mosquitoes kill more people than any other animal, bar none. But the hippopotamus is number 2 in Africa. It's number 2. It kills more people than lions, than hyenas, than honey badgers, than any other animal in Africa, than snakes, than poisonous snakes. Hippopotamus are responsible for, even crocodiles, more than crocodiles. They're responsible for killing about 2,000 to 3,000 people in Africa every year. They are exceptionally dangerous animals and exceptionally aggressive animals. They will come in and attack your boat if they think it's if you get too close. Just because you're there. So, I don't have a lot of reason to doubt sort of the scholarly consensus here that it's a hippopotamus. And I know some creationists will say, well, it's got the tail of a cedar, therefore it had to be a brontosaurus. And then I just go, oh, no. This is figurative language. Okay? This is figurative language. So, and that's how it's the Book of Job is describing Behemoth in figurative language. So, I think Behemoth here is a hippopotamus. I have no reason to doubt otherwise, especially given its aggression and its untamability. You cannot tame a hippo. If you get one young enough, you can train it. but it'll never be tame. And it can really make a mess of your day just by brushing you aside. They're very dangerous animals. Very, very dangerous animals. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, we got a $10 super chat from Cam Brip. 2 Samuel 10:1 seems to indicate that David was on good terms with a king called Nahash. Is this the same guy Saul had to deal with in 1 Samuel 11? If so, how did he become friends with someone so cruel? Well, let's take a look at this. Now, we're just going to take a brief survey of the verses here. Okay, 1 Samuel 10, 1, which says, Then Samuel took a flask of oil, poured it on his head, kissed him, and said, Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his people, inheritance? Sorry, let's go to 1 Samuel 11, sorry. All right. So we're going to take this in chronological order. Now, Nahash the Ammonite came up and besieged Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you. But Nahash the Ammonite said, I will make it with you on this condition that I gouge out one eye. Okay. And Saul routs him, but we don't get further down in the passage that he was killed. Okay. So then we get to 2 Samuel. Verse 10. And now it happened afterwards that the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, became king in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hunan, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent some of his servants to console him concerning his father, but when David's servants came to the land of Israelites, etc., etc. Okay. Here's the thing. David made a lot of, say, less than savory friends when he was on the run. Okay? We have to remember that he was on the run from Saul for many years. Part of it was that when Saul wanted David killed, he was essentially, he had a rogue army. And that army was essentially an army for hire. He was essentially a mercenary. David and his men became mercenaries. And he fought with Philistines. He also, had to entreat himself to the few remaining Canaanite tribes around, including the Ammonites. So it seems that what we can tell from these passages is that Saul was at war with the Ammonites. And while Saul was at war with the Ammonites, David was being treated well by Nahash. Essentially, Nahash treated David as the enemy of Saul and basically said, hey, you are the enemy of my enemy. I have no beef with you. I'll treat you kindly. Hey, if I treat you good, maybe I can torque off my enemy. Two good deeds for the price of one. Okay. So, essentially, I mean, in the case of Nahash, the treaty obligations, of the gouging out of one eye, I mean, that's to prevent any further combat. Essentially, you couldn't be an archer at that point. Essentially, you had no depth perception. You were pretty much useless on the battlefield. So, that wasn't going to fly with the Israelites. Okay, under any circumstances. That's, I think, how David, because David made, as I said, while he was still on the run from Saul, he made a lot of allies that were not Israelites. He made them with Philistines. He made them with some Canaanites. He basically tried to, fall into people's good graces wherever he could. Because as a rogue army, he had no official sanction. He was just a mercenary with a bunch of men. And frankly, too, he didn't know he was going to win in the end. You know, his fortune, he could have easily ended up on the with his head on a pike somewhere. All it would have taken is one battle going bad, and he would have been dead. And when you're living battle to battle, life's pretty uncertain. And, it helps under those circumstances to have all the friends you can get. So, David is tries to reciprocate the kindness he was shown to Hunan, but Hunan blows it off. And really sort of ends up on David's bad side after that. So I think what happened was, yes, Nahash was cruel, but he was kind to David. Hanun learned his cruelty from his father, then tried to apply that to David as well. And that didn't end up so good for him. So anyway, hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But it does seem to come out of that fact when he was, say, on the run from Saul. So I hope that answered your question. Great question. Okay, our next super chat here is from Andrew Goulet for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. How good is the archaeological evidence of the conquest from the Book of Numbers? Specifically, the cities of the Negev, Numbers 21, 1-3, and the cities of Bashan, Numbers 31, 35 to 33 to 35. Okay. Let's pull that up. The Numbers 21, 1-3. Okay, when the Canaanite king of Arad, who lived in the Negev, heard that Israel was coming by the way of Atharim, then he fought against Israel and took some of them captive. So Israel made a vow to the Lord, saying, "If thou wilt indeed deliver his people into my hand, then I will utterly destroy their cities." And the Lord heard the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites. Then they utterly destroyed their cities. Thus the place was called Hormah. Okay. Now Hormah is sort of in the northern part of the country of Canaan. Not a lot of archaeological excavations have been done there, so this is we don't know. We don't know how accurate it is because not a lot of digs have been done in that area. Now we have to understand that even for a country as small as Israel, archaeological excavations are expensive. Very, very expensive. So a lot of sites in Israel have been only partially excavated. Only a few cities have gotten, say, full excavation. Like even big cities, important archaeological cities like Jericho, like Hatzor, like Gezer, are only partially excavated. Now, some of the reason why they only partially excavate a city is to leave portions of it unexcavated for the next generation. One of the things we understand about, say, the practice of archaeology is it's a destructive methodology. It's a destructive practice. Once you excavate a piece of a city, you can't re-excavate it. It's an inherently destructive enterprise. You destroy that strata forever, and nobody can rebuild that strata and excavate it a second time. This is why nobody excavates entire cities anymore. Almost everyone now, all excavators now, just take a slice of it. They do their excavation, and they save it for the next people. Now, there are some places where, say, 80% have been excavated, and there's just not a lot there left to excavate. And like for example, Shiloh has that kind of, where they excavated practically everything, and didn't save much for the next generation, which is why they handed it off to ABR, because there really wasn't very little left. But in some cases, in most cases though, only partial pieces of the city are excavated. Now, the downside of this is that we often don't know to the extent of, say, a city's damaged, or if, say, the extent of, say, there might have been a later layer that's maybe off, that's shifted over from the place where you're actually digging. This happens at, for example, at that Jericho. Say Garstang's excavation turned up 2 destruction layers, whereas Kenyon's only turned up 1. So we do find things like that happening. So it's hard to say if say in the area of Horma, that how accurate this is. Now, the cities of Bashan are going to be the same deal, and we'll just read that text anyway, just for giggles here. 33 to 35. Uh, 31. Well, this is Numbers 31. I don't think that's probably the right passage. However, but the cities of Bashan, same deal. It's in that northern area. We don't have a lot of excavations done in that northern area. It's hard to know exactly what cities were destroyed, and how they were destroyed. They weren't. One of the things that the passages don't say is that they were destroyed with fire. So we don't know if they were just toppled, if they were just overrun, or in what way they were destroyed. So again, a lot of this is just going to come out to, okay, what's the archaeology going to tell us when we actually get there to dig it? So again, but I think the archaeological evidence right now for the Conquest is actually looking pretty good overall. We can't just include, say, the cities of the north here, especially of, say, Horma and Bashan, because that's in the northern area. Some of that's even in Jordan. And digging in Jordan is a lot more difficult than, say, digging in Israel. So we gotta be very, very careful here that we just don't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater here, just because we don't have any current findings for that particular area. We've got other areas, like we got Mount Ebal, we've got Hatzor, we've got there's like 30 cities in say Canaan that were occupied in the late Bronze Age 2B, early Iron Age 1. So that alone is pretty good evidence for a conquest, essentially. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay. Andrew Goulet, again, for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. What awareness did the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Israelites have of civilizations further east like China and India? Okay. Some more than others. The Egyptians did not have much awareness of anything east of, say, Elam. But we do find that some products from China and India did make it to Egypt, particularly cloves from India and silk from China after the reign of Ramses, or during the reign of Ramses III. So they didn't seem to be aware of those countries, but they did receive products from them. Now, Babylon is a different story. Babylon is geographically a lot closer. The Babylonians were aware of India. They were aware of India. We do even find a few Hindi words enter into Akkadian, later dialects of Akkadian. So there is absolutely some interaction happening with India, be it with Babylon. China, impossible to say. We don't really know. But if they were aware of India, they could have been aware of China too. As I said, there's already that trading route. I mean, the trading route is going from China all the way to Egypt. Okay, so the trading route is going that far. Awareness is a different matter, though. Egypt doesn't have to be aware of China to enjoy its goods. Babylon, kind of in the middle there, is aware of India. It might be aware of China too, but it's hard to say. We don't actually have a lot of evidence that they were aware of China. But they also probably would have had some idea of what goods come from China as well, just because they're passing right by. So anyway, again, this is one of those areas of research that's still ongoing. We're learning more and more about how extensive these trade routes were, and they were very extensive. But again, social awareness of foreign lands is a different thing than appreciating the products. And we do even find that there was some trade the other way as well. Like, for example, there was just recently announced that a suit of Assyrian armor was found in China. Okay? So that's raised an interesting question of what is Assyrian armor doing in China? So, so we do have that sort of reciprocity in trade. So we do have it going both directions. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It's an interesting question, and again, we're learning a lot more about this as we go along. Okay. We got one here from Carmel Crunk for $20. Thank you very much for that generous super chat. Why do experts say Israelites descended from Canaanites when the Bible says Canaanites are from Ham? Well, that's because there's a prejudice here against a historical exodus, essentially. A lot of experts think that the Israelites came out of Canaanite because they don't like the whole idea of a historical exodus is incredulous. I did bring this up on, say, IP's Q&A session, where he asks, like, why does Bill Deaver and Israel Finkelstein, accept that the Israelites, have their first, settlements across Canaan in the 12th, 13th century, but deny that an Exodus event. Well, you start reading Israel Finkelstein's book, The Bible Unearthed, and you kind of see why. It's because he's got a view of the Exodus that is really not biblical. That is not in line with, say, the biblical texts. He thinks that, the idea that the Israelites, they left Egypt fighting fort to fort to fort across the north of the Sinai and then into the coastal plain. Well, that's not the route of the Exodus. The route of the Exodus comes out of the Wadi Tumalat and then goes south, and it cuts across the Sinai where there are no fortresses. So, he's got this caricature of the Exodus. And frankly, many experts, you go to some of these conferences and you hear these papers on the Exodus by so-called specialists in the Exodus, and they're really caricatures. They're caricatures they learned in Sunday school. But here's the thing about it, is that Sunday school training is incredibly difficult to get past. You say, one of the things that say, tactics that you sometimes hear, like biology professors do, when they get frustrated with students talking about Noah's flood, the flood and Noah's Ark. All a professor has to do is, all he has to do is he has to say, well, think in your mind, put in your mind the image of Noah's Ark. And what do you see when you think of Noah's Ark? Can all those animals fit in that ark? Of course, everyone thinks about that cartoon they saw in Sunday school. Little tiny ark with heads of animals sticking out of it. You know, you got the giraffe, you got the tiger, you got the lion, you got Barney, Barney the dinosaur. Yeah, the cartoon is ridiculous. Because the cartoon is ridiculous, people automatically then say, oh, maybe this is ridiculous. But that's the image we first get as children. That's the image we get of, say, Noah's Ark as a child. Is something ridiculous, meant to entertain children. You know, one of the things with caricature is sometimes the meaning of caricature and illustration loses its meaning over time. You know, where, for example, the image of the devil as being in a red suit, having cloven hoofs and horns, and people sometimes think, "Oh, that's image from the Bible." No, the devil isn't really that like that. That's biblical imagery. No, it's not biblical imagery. It's medieval imagery. You know, you go to the cathedrals and you see, you know, the gargoyles and the demons, and you know they got horns and goat feet, but that was mockery. That was mockery. It was mockery attacking the pride of the devil by giving him, basically making him look ridiculous, making him look like a goat. But the original connotation of that mockery became lost over time. But people still remember the image. The problem is when we train our children, we are training them with caricatures of the Exodus, of the Bible stories, the narratives. They remember the caricature, not texts. And many of these experts, they grew up in religious homes, fundamentalist homes, Orthodox Judaism homes, with strict religious training that only proposed one way of interpreting the scriptures. And it got replaced with a caricature sometime along the way. And many of these experts are rebelling against the caricature while thinking that's what the Bible is saying. Basically, the descendants of the Israelites, they come from northern Mesopotamia. They come from they're Amorites, they're Arameans. They're migrants from northern Mesopotamia. They're not Canaanites. But because these experts can't accept the caricature of the Exodus, they have to insist that they are descended from Canaanites. So anyway, that's the reason why they're doing it. Anyway, thank you very much for that very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. It's an unfortunate state of affair just having to correct experts on how to read the Bible, but sometimes I gotta really do this. But I appreciate the super chat very much, and it's a good question too. It's a worth question to ask. Okay, next super chat comes from the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, in Egyptian mythology, is there a god realm similar to the Greek Olympus or the Norse Asgard? No. Well, yes and no. The gods in ancient Egypt inhabit two places, one of two places. They'll either inhabit the sky. Okay, so like, for example, gods of the living might inhabit the sky. Okay, or they'll inhabit the earth. Some of them do inhabit the earth. Like God Happy, he inhabits the river. He lives in the river. There's like Shu, he inhabits the air. Okay, he's the atmosphere. You got goddesses like Nut. She lives in the sky. Amun-Re lives in the sky as the Ray boat. The other gods will live in the realm of the dead, the underworld. So that's sort of the division of the homelands of the gods. The sky, the underworld, or the earth. So that's sort of the three domains that gods in ancient Egypt lived in. So there isn't essentially a sort of a Mount Olympus. There's not a Mount Olympus or Asgard where there was a heaven realm for the gods. The gods were sort of more dispersed. So there wasn't like a sort of a, how would I say it, palace of the gods. I mean, Mount Olympus is really a city of the gods on top of a mountain. There isn't anything like that in Egyptian mythology. The closest thing, again, is probably the sky. And, many of them gods lived on Earth, and many of them lived in the underworld. So it's going to depend on the god, but that's sort of the breakdown. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate the super chats. Okay, now we're on to Twidget. Wow, that was a lot of super chats already. Okay, so let's get to, and I know we have many more here. Okay, Gizgo, SBOL for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. When did Egypt begin engaging in regular diplomatic contact with Mesopotamian rulers? Could it have begun as early as the reign of Thutmose III? It actually occurs earlier than that. We actually have evidence to show that there was diplomatic correspondence between the Hyksos and the first dynasty of Babylon. There's a small cuneiform tablet that was found in the scriptorium at Avaris. It's just a small fragment of cuneiform that dates to the first dynasty of Babylon. And the first dynasty of Babylon is the dynasty that we find King Hammurabi in. Now, I think there's 4 kings in that dynasty, if I recall correctly. Just a quick peek at the first dynasty of Babylon here. Let's see here. Babylon dynasty. Okay, there's several kings, so not just one king. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11 kings. There's 11 kings in dynasty. The Hyksos come to rule 1666 BC. So if we look at, say, the first dynasty of Babylon, it could be it's among the last 4 kings. So that tablet dates to the last 4 kings of Dynasty 1 of Babylon. So it could be Ebi Eshu, Amidetani, Shamshu Datana. So it could be any one of those 4 kings. But we don't know which because we don't have enough of that tablet to be sure. But we do know that there was diplomatic correspondence between Babylon and Egypt. Dynasty 15. In the 17th century BC. So, long before Thutmose III. So anyway, it conceivably even earlier than that, because we do find trade goods, as I say, we do find trade goods from Mesopotamia as early as pre-dynastic Egypt. So there is trade goods, going back and forth already back since pre-dynastic Egypt. So there's probably some diplomatic context even back into the Old Kingdom. We just don't have any records for them. The earliest record, as I said, is Dynasty 15. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Great question. Interesting question. Hey. And we got a super chat from Angel VWM for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Joshua47 says the 12-stone memorial at Gilgal will remain there forever. Do you think it is still there? If so, do you think we'll ever find it? If not, what do you think happened to it? Okay, let's take a look at Joshua 4:7. 4:7. Then you shall say to him, because the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it crossed the Jordan, and the waters were cut off, so these stones shall be a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. And thus the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of tribes of the sons of Israel, carried them over them to the lodging place, and put them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan at the place where the feet of the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. Okay. Do I think they're still there? I don't know. Honestly. If they're standing stones, they could have been covered up by something. I mean, we have seen that. Like, for example, at Mount Ebal. Sorry, at Mount Ebal. At Mount Ebal, the altars there were covered up. You know, dirt had covered them up. So if those stones are at Gilgal, still at Gilgal, you know, they might just be buried. We might find it, we might not. Who knows? They've been torn down and used for something else. Also a possibility. You know, stones were recycled. So it's not unheard of that a stone monument was torn down and the stones recycled for other reasons. So this is we're in the area here of sort of speculative archaeology. We just don't know. And do I think we'll find it? I don't know if we'll ever find it. Something like that, it's kind of small. Small things are hard to find. Now, new technologies have some exciting possibilities too. You know, there is the possibility that somebody here could take ground-penetrating radar or cesium magnetometry, go over the site of Gilgal, and find it. It's possible. You don't know. Ground-penetrating radar is amazing technology. The site of Kantir, where P. Ramses was, you know, they've mapped out that whole site now. That whole site is now mapped without turning a single shovel, without even lifting up the town. I mean, there's a farming village on top of Kantir. You know, they didn't have to tear down any buildings or anything. You know, they just went over the streets and sometimes in some of the homes with this ground-penetrating radar and cesium magnetometry, and then used computer telemetry to figure out where all the walls were. Absolutely phenomenal. We know the streets. We know where the temples were. It's amazing. It's amazing what cesium magnetometry can do. And ground-penetrating radar. It's just phenomenal. So, yeah, absolutely. I can see somebody going over to Gilgal, you know, if they get, you know, a little bit of cash in their wallet to rent the machines. They're not. These machines aren't cheap to rent. I'll say that. They would need money. Okay? But somebody with some money, some cash, could go over to Gilgal, do a ground-penetrating radar survey of the site without disturbing a single rock, and may find it. It's possible. If not, they could even find some other goodies under there. You know, it's amazing what you can find with this stuff. So there is cause for hope, but we can't be sure of finding anything. It's just that's just the nature of archaeology. So, anyway, interesting question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Another super chat from Angel VWM. Thank you very much for the $5 super chat. I very much appreciate it. Hi, Dr. Falk. I hope all is well, by the way. Well, thank you very much. I hope all is well with you, too. I heard by some that Ramses II's son was killed, likely by a mace in the head. Is that accurate? No, it's speculation. It's speculation. Okay. Here's what we found. In the tomb of KV5, Kent Week found in a pit the bones of 4 individuals. Not even complete skeletons. Not even complete skeletons. Among those incomplete skeletons, and they're not mummies, so they're not labeled, is the skull of a 25-year-old, possibly male, or we don't even know he's 20. He's in his 20s. We don't even know he's 25. He's in a male in his 20s with a head injury. Okay. Now, Kent Weeks' team basically said, well, this could possibly, maybe be the firstborn son of Ramses II. I mean, it was really we're just going to throw this out there. It's possible. Okay. Now, there's other ways to die of a head injury that don't involve a mace. Okay? But it's unlikely that Amenhotep Kopshef died in warfare. It's unlikely. For several reasons. Amenhotep Kopshef died in his 25th, in Ramses II's roughly the 25th regnal year. The peace treaty with the Hittites had been negotiated and settled roughly in the 21st, 22nd regnal year. So there was no more conflicts with the Hittites at that point. The last campaign of Ramses II was in the 17th year. There was no further campaigns into Canaan after that. The reason why that there's kind of a quiet period between say the Egyptians in the 17th year and the formalization of the peace treaty is because there was a lot of court intrigue happening in the Hittite Empire at that time. And the peace treaty is actually negotiated with a usurper, somebody who usurps the throne in the Hittite Empire. Yeah, he doesn't want any more to do with that war than, say, Ramses II does. For both of those gentlemen, Ramses II, and I think it's Mursili III. I can take a look. I'm sure that's. But quick check, double check my facts here. It's Hattusili III. Okay. It's Hattusili III. The last battle, the Battle of Kadesh, Ramses II has is with Muatawi II. Then you get the usurper Urhiteshub and his successor Hattusili III. Now, Hattusili is essentially inheriting this war that had originally been started by Suppiluliuma I. Ramses II is inheriting this war from a previous dynasty from King Ai. Both these men have no skin in this game. Okay? Hattusili III is a really distant relative of Suppiluliuma I. You know, this whole war started because Ai and Horemheb conspired to kill the prince that Suppiluliuma I sent to marry Tut's widow, Ankh-Sunamun. Okay? Now, that dynasty, Suppiluliuma's the dynasty, is gone at this point. In the case of the Egyptians, the dynasty that started this, which is the 18th dynasty under King Ai, they're gone. A whole new dynasty now. Neither one of these kings has any reason to keep fighting over this assassination. You know? And frankly, Hattusili III's got better things to do. He has to bring his court into stability. Ramses II has got other problems, you know. He'd rather focus on building monuments at this point. So there's a vested interest here in both sides burying the hatchet. So, last battle happens in the 17th year. They ratify that treaty in the 21st, 22nd year. Amenhotep dies in the 25th. It's not because of warfare. Now, the particular individual that does die and is found in KB5, because it is just a skull, we don't know who it is. It is possible because Ramses II lived such a long life. We know that the first 12 sons of Ramses II died before he took the throne. We don't know when they died. We don't know what order they died. We don't know how many sons after the 13th son died. We have before Ramses II himself died. So we don't know actually how many of Ramses II's 52 sons predeceased him. We know at least 12. But that is an at least 12. This is possibly a son that's maybe fooling around with a mace and hit himself in the head. You know? Or he torqued a friend off, or a wife. You know, that's happened in Egypt. You know, where a guy torques off his wife, she picks up his mace and smashes him one in the head. But it's not necessarily Amenhotep. We don't actually have any one-to-one correspondence that the skull belonged to the first son of Ramses II. It could have easily been another son. It could have even been from another tomb, because we don't find any other bones in KV5. These are the only bones we find in KV5. And they're found near the entrance. Did some tomb robbers take some bodies from another tomb somewhere, bring them into KV5, and just loot them there? It's possible. Were these a later burial? Are these just the bones of some individuals during the late and Ptolemaic period that were just shoved in the tomb? Because it's near the entrance. Did they throw them in there and say, "Hey, we got a burial for aunt and uncle, which we didn't care that much for anyway"? You know, we actually see this at the tomb of Akhenaten Nefertari. You know, her tomb is actually more or less a, you know, you go down, it's a big pit. The big pit that drops like 16 feet. You know, you go down that pit and you're not getting out without some help. But, you know, the chamber is sort of halfway down the pit, and you walk down into the chamber, and you can get to the back tomb. Well, you know, some people in the late period, you know, took some bodies and just threw them down the pit. Called that a burial. So, you know, stuff like this happens in Egypt. So again, we don't have enough information here to determine whether or not that was Amenhotep or not. So that's essentially it. I mean, yes, I've seen it on Wikipedia stated as if it was absolute fact, and it's not. It's a conjecture. And it's not a very good conjecture. That's the problem with it. It's not. It's really speculation. And if Mr. Empty Conjecture here was happy around here, I would say he would be saying could be, essentially. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Gizgo SBOL for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Revisionist Peter James believes Ramses III is Shishak and the United Monarchy was during the late 19th dynasty decline. Easy to debunk. Oh, ridiculous, easy to debunk. Now, Peter James is following Corville's chronology. And Corville's a nutter. Completely out to lunch. Now, Ramses III reigned a darn long time. We do know his itinerary. We also know that Shishak is Shoshank I. Okay, and that's pretty easy to prove. We have Shishak's the first inscriptions at Karnak. We do know the itinerary of his campaign. He does go up the coastal plain into the Judean foothills, comes back down, sweeps just shy north of Jerusalem, but doesn't take Jerusalem, and then comes back out to the coastal plain. So Ramses III essentially predates Shishonk I. He long predates Shishonk I. The problem with Peter James and Corville is they want to take that Dynasty 20 and overlap it with Dynasty 21. Now, one of the reasons why this is so easy to debunk is because we know that Ramses III is long before Shoshank I. And both of them are building monuments at Karnak. If you had that overlapping of administrations, okay, where Shoshank I, and this only works for Peter James and Corville, because he's basically saying that Ramses III is contemporary with Shoshank I. And then Shishak is just a mistake. Okay? Mistake between Shishak versus Ramses III. But that's the only way this works, is that he has those overlapping dynasties. Well, the problem here is you don't just have overlapping dynasties, you have overlapping administrations. Overlapping administrators, overlapping viziers. Ramses II has viziers in Upper and Lower Egypt. Shoshank I has viziers also. Whose vizier is in charge? Whose priests are in charge at Karnak? You got Ramses III building a whole temple. Between the first and second pylon. Whereas you have, Shoshank I at this very, very exact same time doing the Bubastai portal at Karnak. It's ridiculous. It's one of those things that where Corville is trying to overlap as many dynasties as he can, just so the pyramids are younger than the flood that takes place in 2350 BC. It's a really, really jaded attempt to try to salvage the flood chronology of American young Earth creationism. That's really what it is. It's ridiculous. It's silly. It's really, really silly. Because the whole artifice just falls apart. It just falls apart. It's not sustainable. It's just simply not sustainable. And part of the reason why it's just so bad, it's just not, it's even hard to fathom how bad this is. And some of it is just, too, that, you've got other kings that are, okay, so let's say, for example, that Ramses III is Shishak. He does a campaign during the reigns of Jeroboam and Rehoboam. But then you're going to have Ramses IV, who also does a campaign. And Ramses VI, that also does a campaign. All right. You then got Shoshank I, who, according to Egyptian records, also does a campaign. So you've got these people who are doing campaigns at practically the same time. He's added a little follow-up here. He says, Peter James actually dates Shoshank to the 9th century BC and overlaps the 21st and 22nd dynasties. Okay. Well, it's still no better. It's still no better. because he is actually forcing Ramses III here. I mean, Ramses III's dates are, 1191 to 1160. So it's 100 years before King David. 150, 200 years. The dates for Rehoboam. That invasion takes place. Let's see here. Let me find that. In the first year of Jeroboam, and that's in 930 BC. Okay, so that invasion by Shishak is in the first year of Jeroboam. So that's going to be an issue. So 930, Ramses II's date is 1190 to 1160. So again, it's a little shy of 200 years. That is a big chunk of time to just make disappear. So if he does say it's in the 9th century, okay. 9th century, he's essentially moved Ramses III up to the 10th century, essentially the later 10th century. We moves it to the later 10th century, which is 930, and Shoshank, which is in, say, the 9th century. He's putting only, say, 100 years of difference between Ramses III and Shoshank I. When, say, you're really here talking 200 years. To compress that much time with overlap. You have competing dynasties. You have competing nomarchs. Because to place it in 930-ish, you're overlapping, as you said, the 21st and 22nd dynasties, and even these had administrate. I mean, these are basically two competing dynasties in the Delta. In the Delta. In the same city, Tanis. Okay. So, that's really inconceivable. To place the Ramses III at 930. We know that say the capital city P. Ramses, went from the reign of Ramses III to Ramses the 11th. Ramses the 11th, that's 1070. You chop off 200 years off of that. So you're in, say, 870. You now have competing kingdoms. You have the 21st dynasty, 22nd dynasty. Both those dynasties, by the way, are ruling from Tanis. The 20th dynasty is ruling from P. Ramses. So not only do you have a situation here where you've got, say, the Ramessides ruling from Ramses, especially the last Ramessides ruling from P. Ramses, at the same time as the 21st and 22nd dynasties, who overlapping at the same time are ruling at Tanis, you're going to have a different problem too, which is a problem of architecture. Because Tanis is built off of, say, the ruins, stone ruins at Ramses. How is the rulers of dynasties 21 and 22 pilfering the stone from Ramses when you've got Ramesside rulers still there ruling? I don't see this as being possible. Most kings don't like you pilfering stone from their temples and palaces. It's just, kings are strange that way. They take that the wrong way. The fact is that we are talking about a dynasty here, the 20th dynasty, that lasts for 100 years. It's a dynasty that lasts for 100 years. So if Ramses III is Shishak, That puts him at 930 BC. That means his dynasty lasts into roughly around 830 BC. And if you got dynasty, then that's the 9th century right there. And into the later half of the 9th century. Now, I don't think James's work is worth the paper it's written on. It's another shoddy rewarming of Corville. And it just isn't worth anything. It just isn't well thought through. It just plain old isn't well thought through. Okay. Well, anyway, thank you for that super chat. Very much appreciated. I'm glad you followed up on that so we could really sort of flesh this out too. Okay, next super chat. Johnny C. Okay, Johnny C from 999. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Did the Hyksos introduce chariots into Egypt? Yes. David Rolls said Dutmos' son was a commander of chariot troops. Yeah, he says all sorts of crazy shit. But Dudimos' reign was near the end of the time of the Hyksos, right? Dudimos' reign was before the Hyksos. About 30 years before. Roughly. Dudimos was, as far as we can tell, the last king of Dynasty 13. And after that, Ichitawe is under pressure. They're falling. And they basically leave and hightail it back to Thebes. We don't have records of Dudimos' son. This is what we call empty conjecture. Essentially, David Roll, we have almost no evidence for Dudimos' reign. We have a couple of cartouches, and that's it. No documents. We don't have any documents from his reign. Okay? This is a problem because, David Roll is going to make up all sorts of stuff out of whole cloth just to create a spinny yarn. This is what makes David Roll so dangerous, is he's a storyteller. And if he doesn't have the facts, he'll just make them up. Was Dudimos' son the commander of chariot troops? Maybe. Could be. Could be. But it's empty conjecture. There's no evidence here. He's just making it up. So, it's really hard to. I have a hard time taking David Roll seriously. Okay. I have trouble taking him seriously on a lot of levels. Okay. Now, we do have to say, David Roll, he's got a BA in music. He's got a Master of Arts in Egyptology from the University College London. He does not have a PhD in Egyptology. He didn't even matriculate in the program. Okay? This is not somebody who's all but PhD, all but dissertation. It's not like he went through a program and just didn't write his dissertation. It's not like that. It was like his advisors told him his idea would never make it, so he never tried. Okay? This isn't about... he basically told his advisor at the University College London about his revised chronology. And his advisor said, this is not going to work. You won't pass with this. So he never enrolled. He's not all but dissertation. He's all but program. He has a master's degree, and that's all he has. Well, that's, in this particular case, that's 2 years of training. That's not even enough to master the languages in Egyptian study. To qualify for a PhD, because if he went for a PhD, he would have had to do at least 2 years of remedial work. It takes 4 years to learn the Egyptian languages. 4 years. Minimum. He has, at most, 2. Yeah, at most, he has 2. The problem is, again, you can earn a master's degree in Egyptology and still not be competent in the languages. You can earn that degree and still not be competent in any of the variety of subfields in Egyptology either. And this is, again, people assume he's got more education than he really has. People assume he knows what he's talking about when he really doesn't. Part of it is he's telling these stories with confidence. And confidence convinces. What he said here about Dudimos' son being a commander of chariots, got no evidence for that. Where's the evidence? Yeah, it doesn't exist. Because we almost have nothing for that reign. Almost nothing. Which is why it's such fertile ground for him. You know, if you have a king with no biography, you can make up anything you want. You can tell some great stories. Oh, he was the greatest king ever. He conquered Canaan. He conquered Babylon. He conquered Nubia and Libya. Heck, he went over and conquered the King of England. Richard the Lionheart trembled when he heard that Dudimosa was coming. You can make all sorts of stuff up when you've got no biography. And that's what he does. Is he fills in the blanks with make-believe. This is why I don't respect him as a historian. It's not because he lacks education. It's because he makes this stuff up. That's why I disrespect him. It has nothing to do with the fact that he doesn't have the education. I mean, if it was just about the not having the education, he could supplement that other ways. But he chooses not to. He chooses to be irresponsible. He chooses to pretend to be a historian when he's a raconteur. Storyteller. Charlatan. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that sort of puts your question in perspective. Very much appreciated. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sushi for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Best way to discuss the Book of Abraham with Mormons. Okay. Now, Mormons are very, very sensitive about their particular holy scriptures. If you start criticizing the Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price, Book of Abraham, they get very agitated very fast. Okay. They get exceptionally agitated. I don't know the best way to discuss the Book of Abraham with Mormons. I will say this, though. The Book of Abraham is not what Mormons claim it to be. Okay. The illustrations I've seen from the illustrated version, and they do have an official illustrated version of the Book of Abraham, does not look like what they claim it is. It's basically a copy of the Book of the Dead. It's essentially a copy of it. You see a funerary bier there. You see canopic jars. You see Osiris. Classic Egyptian imagery. And it's definitely the pictures were taken from a real papyrus. The text. One of the things about ancient texts and ancient languages, and this actually infers to any language. It's not just ancient languages, and it's not just Egyptian and Hebrew. You can tell when something is a translation if you know the original language. Because there are things, one of the things you learn when you learn an ancient or any language is not just what people are saying. But it also becomes clear what they don't say and what they don't, how they don't structure their language. That's actually, in many ways, that's actually more helpful than knowing how they structured it, is how they didn't. This way, it's often really easy to sort of pick out a fraudulent translation from a real translation, because it just sounds hinky. I was, like, for example, in French. French doesn't have a concept of home. House, yes, chez nous, our house, but not home. So, like, for example, the English song, Home, Home on the Range, is untranslatable in French. It's just not there. Likewise, certain syntactical constructions are not there in Egyptian. For example, in Egyptian, you don't find subordinate clauses at the beginning of the main clause. No, they don't front the main clause. You never see this in Egyptian. It's just not something you find. Egyptian starts with its main clause, and then it does its subordinate clauses after. So, when you see a translation from Egyptian, you'll see something like, I loaded my donkey, which was very strained and had difficulty moving, and stuff like that. So all the subordinate clauses come after the main clause in Egyptian. Now, you look at, say, the Book of Abraham. There's a lot of subordinate clauses in front of the main independent clause. You'll find this in Hebrew, but you won't find this in Egyptian. The fact is, a lot of the Book of Abraham was plagiarized from the King James Version of the Bible, essentially. And you can just tell that from the syntax of the translation. There's stuff in there's stuff in there like intelligence. Well, Egyptians have no word for intelligence. In describing a scribe that's really skilled, he might say, "Oh, excellent of fingers," or "excellent of hands," to say someone who's really, really skilled, or wise. But intelligence is not something you find in Egyptian parlance. Not there. So there's a lot of hinkiness in the Book of Abraham that just sort of tips the hand that it doesn't come from an Egyptian source, essentially. It's not structured like an Egyptian document. It doesn't look like an Egyptian document. It has no syntax that you'd find like in an Egyptian document. It doesn't even involve, say, the lexical choices that you'd find in an Egyptian document. It just doesn't. Now, how do you communicate that to a Mormon? That's the tricky bit. That's really difficult. You want to tell them the truth in love, but they're not going to react well to it. They're going to be really, really hostile to it. They're going to think you're attacking them personally, even if you're not. Show them as much love as you can. And if you find them getting, I would just say this: if you might want to give it to them little by little. Give it to them just a little bit at a time. Maybe phrase it as a question. What do you think about the fact that, say, the Book of Abraham has subordinate clauses at the beginning, but you don't find that in say, the Egyptian language? Get them ask them their opinion about their text. Well, what do you think about the fact that the word intelligence doesn't appear in ancient Egyptian? What do you think about the fact that, say, this picture looks exactly like tomb scenes that we find in, like, the Book of the Dead? Aren't these canopic jars? They even have all the heads of the 4 sons of Horus. the guardians of the canopic jars. Maybe use questions. Sometimes a good way to change a person's mind is to start to ask them questions. Make them the teacher. Have them teach you. This was something that was impressed upon me by Trey Gowdy. He basically uses questions to, and he wrote a book recently. I highly recommend that book by Trey Gowdy on how to ask questions, because he showed that you can ask questions in a really sort of disarming way, but still sort of communicate truth effectively doing it. So that's sort of my tidbits of advice here. I wish you well in trying to discuss this with Mormons. It isn't going to be easy, but yeah, absolutely good luck. And thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sushi again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Does Manly P. Hall get Doctrines of Hermes Trismegistus, Book of Thoth, and Egyptian Hermetism right or wrong? I don't know, because I don't know the writing of Manly Hall. I might have cited him once, but I don't remember him. Okay, and there is a relationship between Hermes Trismegistus, the Book of Thoth, and Egyptian Hermeticism. Okay. There is actually a strong relation between them. I discovered this when I did my book on Gnosticism. There's an interrelationship between the two. The Book of Thoth seems to be the oldest of these traditions, and the works of Hermes Trismegistus seems to be some of the Greek attempts to translate or at least adapt portions of the Book of Thoth. Who was it now? The guy who did Jacob, I think it's Dealman. I should remember this guy's name. I'm friends with him. It'll come to me in a moment. Anyway, there's a guy who did an edited edition of the Book of Thoth. Unfortunately, the text we have of the Book of Thoth are very fragmentary. They are written in Demotic, so you do need a Dematist to actually read it. Name Book of Thoth. Richard Jasnow. He's the guy who did the he did a basically a reconstruction and translation of the ancient Egyptian Book of Thoth. He published it in 2005, and it's published by Harasovitz Verlag. So there is a modern version of the Book of Thoth. As I said, it is very fragmentary. It's a little disappointing, to be honest. You kind of wish there was more that was still there. Unfortunately, there isn't. So I can't say whether Manly Hall gets it right or not, because I don't remember what his work is, but there is definitely a relationship between the three. So anyway, I hope that goes a little ways to answering your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Another super chat by Camel Leopard. Thank you so very much for the super chat. Who is Horus the Elder, and how does he differ from Horus, son of Osiris? Okay, excellent question. We are actually going to have another video on the gods of Egypt. We are doing a expose on Horus. So your question here is actually quite timely. It won't be next week, but it'll be a few weeks down the road, because we're going to be doing a next Monday's video is going to be on Spirit World Hell. Then we're going to be doing a popcorn review, and then we'll probably be doing the expose on Horus. Now, who is Horus the Elder? Horus the Elder, I'm going to just do this because we do have a full video coming up on this. We're just going to touch on this briefly. Horus the Elder is the original Horus. He's the original. He's the god of the kings. He's the first royal cult of Egypt. His cult is centered around the town of Nekhen, close to modern Edfu. It is he is the falcon sky god that sort of rests on the king and bestows kingship. Okay, and he is the fifth child of Geb and Nut, the sky, the earth god and the sky goddess. Okay, and he's part of the Osiris myth. Okay, now he differs from Horus in a specific way. A Horus, son of Osiris. Now, Horus, son of Osiris, is sometimes called Horus the Avenger. Essentially, Horus, son of Osiris, is the mythologizing of the unification wars of Egypt. He is the son of Osiris and Isis. Osiris is essentially killed by his brother Seth. And Isis collects the chopped up body of Osiris, sews it together, animates it, has a good time with it, conceives Horus, and Horus grows up and avenges his father. But the Horus, the younger Horus, the Avenger, is essentially basically symbolizing the unification wars between Upper and Lower Egypt. Horus represents Upper Egypt, Seth represents Lower Egypt, and the unification wars between them. So that's sort of the difference in a nutshell. The first one is the god of kingship. The second one is the god of Upper Egypt and the unification wars that resulted. So anyway, that's it in a nutshell. As I say, we'll be going into the Horus cult in some detail in a few weeks' time. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And great question. Okay, we got a $10 super chat here from Cooley27. Thank you very much for the super chat. In Numbers 10:11, the wandering is still in year 2. Okay. By Numbers 22, it seems 40 years. Yep. That's to jump around at times. Between little remarked, can we falsify the hypothesis that it all took place in a few years? Have fun. Oh, I bet. We do know that the conquest takes place over in the case of Numbers 10:11. This is what happens. Let me just pull that up here. Numbers 10:11. Numbers 10 11. Okay. Now, it came about in the second year, in the second month, on the 20th of the month, that the cloud was lifted over the tabernacle of the testimony. And the sons of Israel set out on their journeys from the wilderness of Sinai. Then the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So they're at this point, they're just leaving Mount Sinai. Okay. But a lot happens. Now, Numbers 22. Take a look at Numbers 22. And 22. The sons of Israel journeyed and camped at the plains in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan opposite of Jericho. So yes, this is after the 40 years. So they're beginning the conquest at this point. So they're having a little war with the Midianites. Verse 2, Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, so Moab was in great fear because of the people, for they were numerous, and Moab was in dread of the sons of Israel. And Moab said to the elders of the Midianites, now this horde will lick up all that is around us, as the ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak, son of Zippor, was king of Moab at the time. He sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river in the lands of the sun, saying, behold, a people came out of Egypt. Behold, they cover the surface of the land, and they are living opposite to me. Okay. So yes, the text does jump. That is definitely the case. But there's also other things that are, that's a big jump, though. 10 to 22. Yeah, there is some jump there. We do know that these texts aren't done in sequential order. Here, do we see the spies narrative? Checking something. Okay. So we also, for example, have, say, the Joshua, son of Nun, Caleb, son of Jephunneh, these who spied out the land in Numbers 14. Okay, so we jump from year 2 to they send out the 10 spies. Okay, so the spies basically come back and they basically give their report. 12 spies have sent, and 10 say, there's giants in the land, can't go in there, we're afraid. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, they basically said, hey, yeah, this land's ready for the taking, God can win it for us. Okay. So this happens at that beginning, between Numbers 10 and Numbers 22. Now, in Numbers 14, verse 28, it says to the, once the 10 spies say, hey, there's giants in the land, people get all upset and they say, oh no, we didn't come here to die. We're not going in, and the Lord's displeased. And he says in verse 14, verse 28 of Numbers, he says, say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will surely do to you. Your corpses shall fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered men, according to your complete number, from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. Surely you shall not come into the land which I swore to you, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they shall know the land I have rejected. But as for you, your corpses will fall in this wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they shall suffer for your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness. All right. So, That's what's going on here. Is, yeah, you're going to get a jump from numbers 10 to numbers 22. Okay? But it does tell you in number 14 what's going to happen in the meantime. Essentially, they're condemned to wander a long time in the wilderness. Now, is this exactly 40 years? Can't say. But it's a long time. And probably, if I were to sort of guess here, probably close to 40. Long enough for that old generation to die off. That old generation dies off, the new generation takes over, and they're now going to be led by Joshua and Caleb. The two faithful spies. So, I think I can think if we take this seriously, if we take numbers 14 seriously here, then we have to falsify that the difference between numbers 10 and numbers 2 took place over a lot longer than just a few short years. Because you can't have a whole generation die off in just a couple years. That takes time. They wander. That's going to be the rub here. It's not going to tell you every sort of place they settle and do a crop and, do a harvest and graze their sheep. And they're not going to tell you every nitty-gritty detail about that. But they are going to tell you what's going to happen roughly in the intervening time as a summary. So, I think if we take the text seriously here, we can falsify the hypothesis. Besides, even if we don't have that text, we still have the fact that the Israelites leave Egypt around 1265, and they don't show up again until in say secular texts until the Merneptah Stela around 1217. So there's a good long time there where they're not in Canaan. We see, like, for example, the archaeological sites, late 13th, early 12th century is when we find the new Israelite settlements. We find destruction of Hatzor. That's almost 40 years, a little over 40 years after they leave Egypt. I think this is a hypothesis that can easily be, sort of at least is not congruent with the data. It's not congruent with what we know of the data. So that's where I would sort of stand with that. It wouldn't, saying just a couple years between, a few years between 10 and 22. No, it's not a sojourn of a couple years. It's a sojourn of several, decades. So 40-ish years. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay. Here, continue on. We've already gone 3 hours, so. Gizbo SBOL for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Do you think Abraham met Pharaoh at Ichitawi? Yeah, conceivably, it's possible. He could have met him at Ichitawi. He could have met him in Memphis. Either one's possible. Once he makes it to Memphis, it isn't that much further to Ichitawi. So yeah, he could have met Pharaoh in either place, or at least the king. Pharaoh here is a retrojection in the text. The kings of the Middle Kingdom weren't called pharaohs during Dynasty 13. It's clear that Abraham met one of the kings of Dynasty 13, and we know that because of the synchronism between Neferhotep I and Hammurabi, and in turn Hammurabi and Abraham himself. So we know Abraham's dating is roughly in Dynasty 13, sometimes around Neferhotep I. So yeah, it probably would have been at Ichitawi. And as I said, there is a road. Abraham could have taken a road that came off the Sinai. He could have gone the way of Shur, entered in through the Wadi Tumalat, and gone down to Heliopolis, and then from Heliopolis to Ichitawi. Very possibly he could have done that. So, yeah. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Slim2K for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. I've seen it argued that Paul is saying women are not the Imago Dei based off of 1 Corinthians 11:7. Since he only refers to man being created in the image. Thoughts? Okay, let's talk about this. I don't know. Do you think you're not part of the Imago Dei? Sorry. She says this is why God said man needs help. Okay. All right. Verse 7 says, "For man ought to not have his head covered, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man." Okay. Now, this is what we call a non-exclusive statement. Okay? Man is exclusively the image and glory of God. But the woman is not exclusively. She's not excluded from being in the glory or image of God, but she's also in the glory of man. Yeah. Women have both. Women have both. And how do we know this? The book of Genesis tells us. Okay. So, Genesis 1. Let's go down here to the 6th day. Verse 27. And this is the key Imago Dei passage. All the other sort of Imago Dei passages get their sort of foundation from Genesis 1:27. And it reads, and let's go to 26 here. And then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." So our image and our likeness. This is cultic language. An image here is a cultic image, like an idol, and an image is essentially a sort of a synonym for that. "And let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Okay. So women are not excluded from the Imago Dei. Now, women have their inheritance. I mean, they are not say mankind. We're made from dust. We're dirt. We're essentially dirt. God made Adam from the Adamah, the red dirt. Okay? Women were taken from the side of man, the rib. So they share their flesh with us. That doesn't exclude them from having the Imago Dei. They have just as much the Imago Dei according to Genesis 1 as men. They also, though, have an extra attribute, which is also they have the glory of man as well. So it's one of those cases where they have, say, two natures, lack of a better word. They have the Imago Dei, and they have the Imago Homo, which is the image of man. They have both here. So, yeah, I wouldn't make this argument that Paul is saying that women don't have the Imago Dei. This is eisegesis. This is essentially eisegesis. Yeah, let's get back to that. 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 11:7. Yeah, so in order to make the basically you have to essentially read something extra into the text. That second clause, but the woman is in the glory of man, is exclusive to the image of God, and that's a form of eisegesis that's just not in the text. So this is the person who's arguing that is making a bad argument, making a bad biblical argument. Period. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and good question. Okay, and then finally another super chat from Slim2K for $5. Thank you again for that super chat. In 1 Corinthians 11:10, he says, "Because of the angels." Could this support that the sons of God were angels who had relations with the daughters of men? Well, let's say. Let's get a little context here. Let's go from verse 8. For man does not originate from woman, but woman from man. For indeed, man was not created for woman's sake, but woman for man's sake. Therefore, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority over her head because of the angels. However, in the Lord, neither woman is independent of man, nor man independent of women. All right. Now, there are people who will read this as that angels can procreate with men. I reject this in its entirety. I reject this. Angels are not men. They're not human beings. They have no human DNA. They lack the ability to procreate. They have essentially simulacra. They can manifest temporarily simulacra bodies. Okay, but a simulacra is not a human in essence. It's not an incarnation. An incarnation is something unique to Jesus Christ. Angels can, say, interact, produce temporary bodies, but they are not human. They don't have human DNA. They cannot procreate. And this is something that's been in the scholastic literature for a very, very long time. This is something that's been in the scholastic literature for over 100 years. So I'm not saying anything new here. This is nothing earth-shaking. This is something that's been in the discourse of, say, Genesis 6:3 for over 100 years. Now, I don't think what this is talking about is causing the angels to fall into sexual relations. I think that's a misreading of the text. I think what this is it's basically, how do I say this? Providing a bad example for angels who are dealing with, say, other naughty spirits who are not subjecting themselves to proper authority. Let me frame this another way. A lot of, say, the fallen spirits, some of them were angels, some of them are other kinds of spirits. All of those other kinds of forces of darkness basically rejected the authority that they were given. They were put under authority, as everybody's under authority of some kind. What they did was they left the places of their authority. They decided that they did not want to be under authority. So they abandoned their responsibilities. They abandoned the hierarchy that they were put into to serve, because they didn't want to serve. They wanted to be served. So then now you have the angels who have to rebuke these spirits, who have to rebuke these powers of darkness, and basically tell those powers of darkness, hey, you clowns abandon your responsibility. Why don't you now go, don't make matters worse. You abandon your proper authorities, you abandon your responsibilities, and then but what happens is those dark spirits are going to just say, well, look at these humans. Look at these humans. The woman's over the man here. She's not respecting her authority. Why should I? These are your Christians, right? This is your church, right? Women have authority over men. Men have authority over pastors. The whole infrastructure, the whole hierarchy is upside down in your church. Why can't we do the same? That's what's going on in this text. It's trying to show you that what we do has consequences beyond just what happens in our homes and what happens in our churches. There's a spiritual war going on out there. There's a spiritual war out there. And it's not just a war of spirits. It's a war of words, a war of ideologies. It's a war of, say, a created order. God made things a certain way and things in their place for a reason. He made us to function certain ways. And when we decide not to function within that hierarchy and within that created order, we're thumbing our nose at God. Thumbing our nose at God. And such that those who are trying to uphold what God designed, that serves God in his glory, it just makes their job harder. And here, angel may not necessarily even be a spiritual being. It could just be, say, a messenger. A messenger that's saying, hey, why is your church being run, by, women who are bullying their husbands? Why is your pastor, why is he, being subjected to a somebody who's disobeying the word of God? So there's a lot of these issues. I mean, this is more than just a spiritual issue. It's a practical issue. But it's to say that this is the sons of God were angels and they were having sexual relationships with the daughters of men misses the point of the text. It throws something weird in the mix. It will throw something really, really weird in here that really subverts what's sort of obvious. And that here is the obvious thing here is the passage, the context of the passage is about authority and structure and hierarchy and created design, created hierarchies and functions and roles that God has predetermined us to fulfill. So to throw that whole sons of God, angels, procreating with men, just throws confusion into the text. It throws confusion into the text. And I just don't think it's a good interpretation, honestly. So, that's my opinion. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, I think that is our final super chat. So what we're going to do, because it is really late, we've gone 3 hours and 20 minutes. We are going to take, at most, 2 non-super chats, and then we're going to call it a night. So, we had a lot of super chats tonight. Okay. So, looking for that Q and a colon. Gonna skip that one because I'm gonna take this one here. Maybe. Give me a Q and a colon. We do notice that sort of after sort of the super chats start getting going, people stop putting in their questions with Q's and colons. So it can be sometimes a little. Take this warrior from the Most High. Dr. Falk, is Amin a textual variant of Amin? Yes, roughly. It's just a textual variant. It's no real difference between. It means truly or indeed or yes, surely. So that's what it means. You find it for John 8:58. Amin, Lego Humin, Prin Abam Genestai. Amin, truly, truly. Amen is the same thing. It's essentially the same sort of, just a textual variant. So no difference between. All right. So that's the first non-super chat. That one. Just because I avoid your question tonight doesn't mean I won't take it another night. Should I should I skip your question tonight if you post it on a subsequent live stream? Doesn't it might take it to another live stream. Sometimes I just, with non-super chats, pass it over because of whim. I want something interesting, especially at the end of the night. I want interesting questions at the end of the night. Take this one from Black Chidori. 7. Is an early Exodus date incompatible with Mosaic authorship? Yes, it is. Here's the problem with early Exodus date, and this will be the last question of the night. The early Exodus date requires that significant portions of the Bible be written 200 years after the Exodus. Essentially, that's what it requires. Essentially, what it requires was something that's called redaction criticism. Okay. Now, and this is something that's been a long-standing problem with the early Exodus dates. This isn't a new problem. When James Orr proposed the early Exodus date, and he's the guy that came up with this in 1906. He proposed that Amenhotep II was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and that it took place around 1446, roughly. So that's his two sort of big contributions here. And almost immediately, it came out that that this could be a problem with Mosaic authorship, because the city of Ramses was well known to have been well after the time of Amenhotep II. This has already been known back in the early 19th century. Okay? So already it had been pointed out to James Orr that this could be a problem. Well, James Orr kind of hummed and hawed it off. He didn't take it too seriously because, frankly, James Orr really believed in Mosaic authorship of the Old Testament. That was the whole point of his book. It was supposed to be a defense against, say, the documentary hypothesis, critical scholarship. He was really a strong proponent of, say, traditional authorship, traditional reading. But he'd already been told this. And his response at the time was kind of disappointing. Well, he goes, "Yeah, but history will iron out the details here. We'll find out when the history comes out." Well, since then we've actually found Ramses. Now, back in 1925, J.W. Jack repopularized the early date of the Exodus theory, and this, already at this point, the criticism of redaction, the whole idea that of Mosaic authorship did not go away. It did not go away with sort of James Orr's hand waving. The whole problem didn't go away. What happened was that in 1925, J.W. Jack wrote a popularization of James Orr's theory in a paperback. It was actually a hugely successful paperback. It sold something like 2 million copies for in 1925. That was a bestseller. I mean, it was a gangbusters bestseller. So he did this book on the early Exodus date. And J.W. Jack, solved the problem of redaction criticism by saying, we're going to say, I accept redaction criticism. We don't need Mosaic authorship. Mosaic authorship? Who needs that? Mosaic, redaction criticism? Embrace it full-heartedly. Early date of the Exodus? Full-heartedly. Well, while Jack's approach to this was creative, it certainly did not sit well with American evangelicals and fundamentalists. Because for many evangelicals and fundamentalists in the 1920s and 1930s, the redaction, say the documentary hypothesis, was sort of the gateway out of Christianity, out of Mosaic authorship. So I think that this was something that did not sit well. Now, later early Exodus proponents, like for example ABR, Associate for Biblical Research, was started by David Livingstone. And he basically was trying to prove the Bible using archaeology, but he had two fundamental beliefs. He believed in James Orr's hypothesis, and he believed in a American young Earth creationism. And ABR still holds that today as their core beliefs. ABR still holds that the early Exodus date and American young Earth creationism. So you still see them promoting both. They promote. And this is one of the reasons why ABR has so much traction in the creationist community, is because they are seen as allies. So anywhere there's a creation conference, there's often somebody from ABR there, giving a lecture or something. But anyway, I digress. The topic of Mosaic authorship still has come up with, say, with ABR and their representatives. Now, they're not comfortable with this. But they also have basically gone into a mode of cognitive dissonance. Like there was a pretty well-known debate between James Hoffmeyer and Charles Ayling. Charles Ayling, before he retired, was a representative from ABR representing the state. And, Hoffmeyer said, hey, if you believe in the early date, you also have to believe in redaction criticism. Because you have to say that, all these toponyms that date to 200 years after the early Exodus date had to have been changed by a later redactor who wasn't Moses. Places like P. Ramses. It's a date. It's got a terminus post quem. It wasn't around prior to the 13th century. Places like Pithom, Migdol, and to a much lesser extent, even possibly Baal-Zephon and Pihirot. These are toponyms that are basically contemporary with either Seti I or Ramses II. Well, Charles Ayling just sort of had cognitive dissonance, deer in the headlights. He just refused to accept it. And this is where we're at right now with people from ABRs. Mosaic authorship is an incredibly difficult issue for reconciling the Exodus account with the early date, because all those toponyms are datable. It's the genealogical problem. When you go to a genealogist and you want to get a family tree researched, they'll ask you questions about your ancestors, their names, but they'll also ask you about their places. It's not enough to know an ancestor's name, build a genealogy. You have to know where they lived, because a name has to be tied to a place to give it grounding. When we look at, say, the Exodus, we have not just names, we have geography. And geography is eminently datable. And in the case of the route of the Exodus, it almost all dates to the 13th century. This is a really big problem if you want to claim Mosaic authorship, especially for the first passages of the book of Exodus. Because now you have to say, okay, well, it's a later redaction. Now, you will hear them sometimes tongue slip. Like, for example, I heard Petrovich's tongue slip once that it really should have read Avaris. Ramses should not have read Ramses. It should have read Avaris. It was changed by a later editor. You understand the implications of that, right? The name Ramses occurs 5 places in the Pentateuch. It's not just in Exodus. It's in Numbers and it's in Genesis. Are you telling me that a later editor re-edited Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers? Are you telling me that the name Pithom was changed from Cheku to Pithom by a later editor? Are you telling me that Migdol, forces that didn't exist, was inserted by a later editor? Are you telling me that Balsaphon and Pihahirot were inserted by a later editor? It even goes on. I mean, and this isn't just something the problem with, say, Mosaic authorship. It's also a problem with, say, the book of Judges and Joshua too. I've heard him say that, we only find one destruction layer in the Late Bronze Age at Hatzor. And that's in the Late Bronze. It's basically Late Bronze 2B, roughly 1200, 1220 BC. I have heard some of these early Exodus proponents basically say that, oh, that's not the destruction of Joshua. That's the destruction of Deborah. Okay. What about Joshua 11:11, where it tells us that Joshua destroyed Hatzor with fire? If Joshua destroyed it with fire, we should find a destruction layer there around 1400 BC. What we actually find in Hatzor is contiguous occupation. We find something else. We find Cypriot ware. Constant occupation of Cypriot ware from the Middle Bronze Age all the way to the Late Bronze 2B. Uninterrupted. It's actually really remarkable. It's actually incredibly remarkable how clean and how every sort of stage of Cypriot ware is represented in the stratigraphy here. I mean, it doesn't get better than this. It really doesn't. There's no destruction layer in 1400. What we find is occupation. So they're having to also rewrite, say, Book of Joshua. Oh, no, there was no fire there. That happened during Deborah. Oh, wait, what? Look at Deborah. There's no fire in the text to Deborah. Well, if it happened there anyway. Okay. So it isn't just Mosaic authorship that's the problem. It's also the authorship of Joshua and Judges as well. That whole issue of redaction criticism is just going to keep coming back and haunting them. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. This is going to be the last question of the night. We've gone on now for 3.5 hours. We answered a lot of questions tonight. It was a really, really busy night. So we're going to call it a night here. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. Wow, it was quite the night. So anyway, I want to thank everyone who gave a super chat tonight. You guys really, really. Oh, there's actually one more super sticker here that I did not thank. So I'm going to thank this person quickly here. See a $10 super sticker here. Oh, okay. Jack Ray gave a $10 super sticker. Thank you very much for the super sticker. Very much appreciated. Your guys' super chats really help us. We couldn't be doing this without you, honestly. You cover a lot of our expenses, and we really, really appreciate it. So we just want to say thank you so much for your support. Thank you for your prayers. We couldn't do it with all the prayer warriors that help us here. And we couldn't do it without our volunteers. We now have some volunteers that are actually helping us out, like do indexing for these live streams. Who are helping us on our Discord. I really, really appreciate all the support. So thank you so much. And we got two more super chats come in. Mecha Tanky Stalinus for $5. Thank you for that super chat. Your ministry has blessed me in many, many ways. Thank you for what you do. Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's been a great pleasure having you on the Discord server too. I've really enjoyed seeing you there, and basically a lot of the vigorous discussions that's been going on there. I'm so glad the ministry is helping you and blessing you. This is why we do it. This is the reason we're here. We're here to help. We're here to educate. We're here to provide a unique perspective that we don't see a lot on YouTube. So I'm so glad it's meeting a need, because that tells us we're actually doing a good work. How do you know that a ministry is effective? It's meeting a need. If it's blessing people, if it's helping them, then it's meeting that need. And want to thank you so much for your financial support. It just helps us so very much, and we so appreciate it. Thank you very much. And finally, we have one last super chat here from Nick Felstead for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. He goes, I'll ask my question next time. Thanks, Dr. Falk. Well, thank you so much for the question, or for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And absolutely feel free to ask your question next time. We will be happy to take it. Basically, we started these live streams because we got so many questions coming in that we couldn't answer them all. So we had to, dedicate a piece of time, Friday evenings where we could answer as many questions as we could. So, in a sense, we've become a victim of our success. We've become we've grown so fast. I mean, I look back, and we haven't been around that long. We've only been a channel for a little over 2 years. And I remember my first video, which was terrible production values, horrible production values. But I remember that first week, we got 1 subscriber. Yeah, it was an ignominious start. But the following week we got 2 subscribers. Then the next week we kind of got 3 subscribers. by the end of the month, we had a good 10 subscribers. So, so for those first 10, thank you very much. And then we started doing these live streams about a year ago because the questions became overwhelming. Well, now we're at a little over 6,400 subscribers, and we are we're finding that we're having to get really creative now about how we outreach to the community. So I want to again thank you very, very much for the super chat. I'm glad, I'm more than happy to answer your questions next time. We do very, very much appreciate it. Okay. So with that said, I want to wish all our, we're going to call it a night. I want to wish all our subscribers a great evening. We thank everyone who's come on the live chat tonight. You guys make a great party here, and we really like the vibe you guys give off. I want to thank all the super chatters. Again, you guys help us to pay our bills. We really appreciate that. Like, can't imagine how much that helps us. So incredibly important to us. We also want to thank those who watch our videos every week, because without you feed the algorithm. When you guys leave comments, when you guys leave likes, or even dislikes, the algorithm doesn't care if it's a like or a dislike. It tells the algorithm that people are interested. If the algorithm knows you're interested, they spread the word about the videos. So we appreciate our regular subscribers also. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. Our Patreon supporters don't get as many perks as they deserve. They are doing this sacrificially, and we do appreciate all the help they give us. They need more bennies, and we do appreciate that they have been patient with us in this regard. So anyway, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight, and we really appreciate the questions. It was a great set of questions tonight, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.